This video will help you sleep and relax. But before we begin, I would like to know which city you're from and what time you're watching this. Now, subscribe to the channel, relax, and let's begin. I still can't sleep through the night. It's been 3 months since we left the house and I swear I can still hear them, those damn whispers. No one believes me. Not my husband Jack, not my therapist, not even my best friend who stood by me through everything else. But I know what I heard. I know what I found. It started last October when we bought the old Harrington place on Maple Drive. A beautiful Victorian house built in 1876 that had fallen into disrepair over the decades. We got it for a steal, which should have been our first warning. But Jack and I were so excited to have our first real home together, a place with character and history, as the realtor kept emphasizing. God, I wish I'd paid more attention to the way she hesitated before showing us the upstairs. The first week was just exhausting work, scraping wallpaper, fixing floorboards, painting everything we could reach. The house needed so much love, but we were determined to restore it. I remember feeling so optimistic, taking before and after photos to share on social media. I was actually happy. The noises started subtly, just little creaks and groans that Jack immediately dismissed as the house settling. That's what everyone says about old houses, right? They make noise, they breathe, they settle. Normal stuff, except it wasn't just creaking. Sometimes I'd hear what sounded like footsteps overhead when I was alone downstairs. Other times there'd be this cold draft that would sweep through a room even when all the windows were closed. I kept telling myself it was just the poor insulation, another item on our endless renovation list. But then I started hearing the whispers. The first time was when I was in the kitchen unpacking boxes. It sounded like someone was having a conversation in the next room, but when I went to check, no one was there. Jack wasn't even home. He was at work. I shrugged it off, thinking maybe it was the neighbors' voices carrying through the walls. Our house was detached, but still, it had to be something logical like that. The whispers kept happening, though, always just quiet enough that I couldn't make out what they were saying, but loud enough to make me stop what I was doing and listen. It was like trying to hear a conversation happening underwater, muffled but unmistakably human. I started having trouble sleeping. The whispers seemed to get louder at night, and I'd lie awake while Jack snored beside me, straining to understand what they were saying. I didn't tell Jack at first. He was already stressed about money after all we'd spent on the house, and I didn't want him thinking I was losing my mind on top of everything else. But things escalated on January 4th. I remember the date because it was right after we'd taken down our Christmas decorations, and the house felt especially empty and cold. That night, around 3 in the morning, I woke up to what sounded like someone murmuring right next to my ear. I bolted upright, heart pounding, but Jack was fast asleep, and there was no one else in our bedroom. The murmuring continued, though, and I realized it was coming from inside the walls. I know how that sounds. Trust me, I've replayed this moment in my head 1,000 times, wondering if I was dreaming or hallucinating, but I wasn't. I was wide awake and those whispers were real. I got out of bed, careful not to wake Jack, and followed the sound. It led me down the hallway to the old study, a room we'd barely touched since moving in because we had more urgent areas to renovate first. The whispers grew louder as I approached, but the moment I stepped into the room, they stopped. The silence was almost more unnerving than the whispers. I stood there in my pajamas, shivering, partly from fear, partly because it was freezing in that room. My breath came out in visible puffs, even though the heating was supposed to be on throughout the house. That's when I noticed the wallpaper in the corner. It was peeling away. From the wall, which wasn't unusual in this house, but something about it caught my eye. There seemed to be a straight edge behind it, not the usual rough plaster or lath. I walked over and tugged at the loose wallpaper. It came away easily, revealing something that made my stomach drop. The outline of a door, a small door, maybe 3 feet high, that had been wallpapered over. I should have walked away. I should have gone back to bed, woken Jack up, waited until morning. Anything but what I actually did. But curiosity overrode my fear, and I started picking at the seams of the hidden door. It took some effort, but I managed to pull it open. It wasn't locked, just stuck from years of disuse. Behind it was a small, cramped space, not quite a room, more like a large closet. The air that rushed out was stale and carried a faint smell of something I couldn't identify. Not quite rot, but something old and unpleasant. Inside was a wooden chest. Nothing else, just bare walls, a wooden floor covered in decades of dust, and this chest sitting in the center like it was waiting for me. The whispers returned, louder now, and seemingly coming from the chest itself. They were urgent, almost pleading. I couldn't understand the words, but the tone was clear. They wanted me to open it. Again, I should have stopped. I should have closed that little door and pretended I never found it. But I didn't. I knelt down and lifted the lid of the chest. Inside were yellowed photographs and letters tied together with faded ribbon. The photographs were old, late 19th century from the look of them. They showed various people, presumably former residents of the house, but something was off about their eyes. They looked vacant, like there was nothing behind them, just empty shells posing for a camera. With shaking hands, I untied the ribbon and started reading the letters. They were dated from 1892 to 1897, written by someone named Eleanor Harrington. The first few were ordinary enough. Details about daily life, gossip about neighbors, complaints about the harsh winter. But as I read on, they took a darker turn. Eleanor wrote about hearing voices in the house, about her husband Thomas becoming increasingly paranoid and aggressive. She described nights when she'd wake up to find him standing over their bed, staring at her with those same vacant eyes from the photographs. The final letter made my blood run cold. It was dated March 15th, 1897, and it was essentially a confession. Eleanor wrote about what Thomas did to those poor children and how she had helped him hide the evidence. She didn't go into explicit detail, but there were phrases that left little to the imagination. "The basement floor has been re-cementing," she wrote. "Thomas says no one will think to look there." As I read those words, the whispers around me grew to screams, high-pitched and desperate. They filled my head until I couldn't hear myself think. I dropped the letters and clapped my hands over my ears, but it didn't help. The screaming was inside my head. Then the small door slammed shut behind me. I spun around and pushed against it, but it wouldn't budge. I pounded my fists against it, screaming for Jack, but either he couldn't hear me or, I don't know. The space felt like it was getting smaller, the walls closing in. The air grew thinner, colder. Those screams kept getting louder, and I swear I could make out words now. Help us, find us, below. I don't know how long I was trapped in there. It felt like hours, but might have been minutes. I was hyperventilating, on the verge of passing out, when suddenly everything went silent. The door creaked open on its own, and I practically fell out into the study. I scrambled to my feet and ran back to our bedroom. Jack was still asleep, completely unaware of what had happened. I crawled into bed beside him, shaking uncontrollably, and waited for morning. When daylight came, I tried to tell Jack what happened. He looked at me like I was crazy and insisted on checking out the study. We went together, and of course, there was no hidden door behind the wallpaper, just solid wall. No seams, no outline, nothing to suggest there had ever been an opening there. I started doubting myself after that. Maybe it had been a vivid nightmare. Maybe the stress of the renovation was getting to me. Jack suggested I see someone, and I agreed, hoping a therapist could help me make sense of what happened. But the whispers didn't stop. They got louder, more constant, and they seemed angry now, like they were furious that I'd found something I wasn't supposed to find and then failed to do anything about it. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. I started seeing things out of the corner of my eye, shapes moving in the shadows, figures standing at the end of hallways that would vanish when I turned to look directly at them. Jack thought I was having some kind of breakdown. Maybe I was. But then we found the newspaper articles. Jack was researching the history of our house for renovation permits when he discovered that in 1972, the owners had done substantial work on the basement. They'd torn up the concrete floor to install new plumbing, and they'd found human remains, small bones, children's bones. The case had been reopened briefly, but with all potential suspects long dead, it was eventually closed again. The article mentioned that Thomas and Eleanor Harrington, who owned the house in the late 19th century, had been suspected of involvement in the disappearance of several local children but were never charged due to lack of evidence. That was enough for me. I refused to spend another night in that house. Jack finally agreed to move, more for my mental health than because he believed anything supernatural was happening. We sold the house at a loss to some house-flipping company and moved into an apartment across town. But here's the thing, the whispers followed me. They're quieter now, more distant, but they're still there, especially at night. Sometimes I'll wake up and hear them coming from inside my closet or from the bathroom drain. And sometimes, when I close my eyes, I see those vacant-eyed people from the photographs. They're standing in a circle in our old basement, looking down at something I can't quite see. I've tried to research more about the Harringtons and what happened in that house, but information is scarce. The local historical society has some records of them, but nothing about missing children or investigations. I don't know what to do. Jack thinks the therapy is helping, but how do I tell him that I still hear them? That sometimes I wake up with dirt under my fingernails and no memory of how it got there? That last week I found myself standing in our apartment parking lot at 4 in the morning, staring in the direction of our old house with no recollection of leaving our bed. The whispers are calling me back. They want me to finish what I started, to find what's still hidden there. And the worst part? Sometimes I think I want to go back too, to dig up whatever secrets are still buried in that house, because until I do, I don't think they'll ever let me rest. Story 2. My boyfriend Alex and I had been planning this getaway for months. We both work ridiculous hours in Chicago, me at a marketing agency and him in software development, and we desperately needed to disconnect. No emails, no Slack notifications, just us in a cabin surrounded by trees and silence. We found this place online about 4 hours from the city, deep in the woods, but still accessible by car. The photos looked perfect. A small wooden cabin with a porch swing, a fireplace, and no neighbors for miles. We left the city around 3 in the afternoon last Friday. The drive started out perfect. We were laughing, singing along to playlists, and feeling the stress melt away with each mile. Alex was driving his old Toyota, which isn't the most reliable car, but has gotten us through plenty of road trips before. The weather forecast had mentioned some fog, but we weren't worried. By the time we hit the rural highways, the sun was setting, and that's when the fog started rolling in. It wasn't too bad at first, just wisps crossing the road, but within an hour it had become this thick, soupy blanket, the kind where your headlights just bounce back at you instead of cutting through. Alex slowed down to about 30 miles per hour, both of us leaning forward in our seats trying to see the road. That's when we saw him. A tall figure suddenly appeared in our headlights, standing at the side of the road with his thumb out. My first instinct was to tell Alex to keep driving. I've seen enough horror movies to know better than to pick up strangers on foggy roads in the middle of nowhere. But Alex has always been the help everyone type. Before I could object, he was already slowing down. "We can't just leave someone out here in this weather," he said, rolling down his window as we pulled alongside the man. The hitchhiker was tall and lanky, wearing jeans and a dark jacket that looked too thin for the autumn chill. His face was gaunt, with deep-set eyes that didn't seem to blink enough. He said his name was John, and that his car had broken down about 5 miles back. He'd been walking for hours, trying to reach the next town. "I can pay for gas," John said, his voice oddly flat. He held up a $20 bill. I wanted to scream no, but Alex was already unlocking the doors. "Hop in, man. We're heading to Cedar Creek. We can drop you somewhere on the way." John slid into the back seat behind me, and I immediately felt the temperature in the car drop. Not just from the door being open, but something else. I shifted uncomfortably, trying to catch his reflection in the side mirror, but the fog made it impossible. Alex, completely oblivious to my discomfort, started chatting away. "So what brings you out this way, John?" "Visiting family," he replied after a pause that lasted just a beat too long. "Haven't seen them in years." "That's nice," Alex said. "We're heading to a cabin for the weekend. Getting away from the city, you know." I felt John's eyes on the back of my neck. "I know all about getting away," he said. The conversation died after that. Alex tried a few more times to make small talk, but John's responses were short and cryptic. I kept my eyes on the road ahead, wishing the fog would clear, wishing we'd reach a town or gas station, anything with other people around. About 20 minutes after picking up John, the car started making a strange noise, a stuttering, clanking sound from under the hood. "That doesn't sound good," Alex muttered, tapping the dashboard as if that would help. The car coughed, sputtered, and then died completely. We rolled to a stop at the side of the road, surrounded by nothing but trees and fog. My stomach dropped as Alex turned the key several times with no response. "Damn it," he sighed. "Battery was fine this morning." He grabbed his phone. "No signal. Great." "I can take a look," John offered from the back seat. "I know a bit about cars." Alex seemed relieved. "That would be awesome, thanks." They both got out of the car, and I watched through the windshield as they lifted the hood. The fog swirled around them, sometimes obscuring them completely from view. I couldn't hear what they were saying over the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I checked my own phone. No signal. We were completely cut off from the outside world, stuck on a deserted road with a stranger who made my skin crawl. I glanced at my purse on the floor, wishing I had something, anything, I could use to protect myself if needed. That's when I heard it. A dull thud, followed by silence. "Alex?" I called out, rolling down my window slightly. No answer. I waited. A few seconds, my breathing shallow. "Alex?" I called again, louder this time. Still nothing. With shaking hands, I unbuckled my seatbelt and opened the car door. The fog immediately enveloped me, damp and cold against my skin. I took a few steps toward the front of the car. "Alex, is everything okay?" As I rounded the hood, I saw Alex lying on the ground, blood pouring from a wound on his head. Standing over him was John, holding what looked like a wrench from Alex's trunk. His eyes, when they met mine, were completely empty, not angry, not frenzied, just void of any emotion. "You won't be driving anymore," John said simply, as if commenting on the weather. "But don't worry, I'll take good care of you." I didn't think, I didn't plan, I just ran. I bolted into the woods beside the road, ignoring John's calls behind me. The fog was thinner under the trees, but it was nearly dark now, and I kept stumbling over roots and rocks. My ankle twisted painfully as I scrambled up a small incline, but adrenaline kept me moving. Behind me, I could hear John crashing through the underbrush. "Samantha," he called, his voice eerily calm. "You're being silly. Come back to the road. Your boyfriend needs help." I bit back a sob and kept running, trying to move as quietly as possible. The forest floor was damp, muffling my footsteps, but also making it slippery. I fell twice, scraping my palms and knees on rocks and branches. "I've done this before, you know." John's voice drifted through the trees. He wasn't shouting anymore, just talking conversationally, which somehow made it worse. "The hitchhiker trick works every time. Couples are the best. The men always want to help, and the women are too polite to object." I pressed myself against a tree trunk, trying to control my breathing. My ankle was throbbing now, and I knew I couldn't keep running much longer. I needed to find shelter, or a weapon, or both. "The others didn't run as far as you," John continued, his voice closer now. "I'm impressed, Samantha. You've got more fight in you." The way he said my name made me feel physically ill. I peered around the tree and could make out his silhouette about 50 yards away, moving slowly, scanning the woods. In his hand was something that glinted dully in what little light remained. The wrench, still wet with Alex's blood. I started moving again, more carefully this time, putting distance between us without making noise. The woods seemed to stretch on forever, dark and disorienting, but then, through the trees ahead, I saw a faint glow, a light. Hope surged through me. A house, or a cabin, someone who could help. I changed direction, heading toward the light, my injured ankle screaming in protest with each step. Behind me, John had gone quiet, which was somehow more terrifying than hearing him talk. Was he still following? Had he given up? Or was he just being more careful now, stalking me silently? As I got closer, I could see it was indeed a cabin, small with a porch light illuminating a weathered door. Smoke curled from the chimney. Someone was home. I burst from the tree line and limped across the small clearing to the cabin, practically falling against the door as I pounded on it with both fists. "Please," I sobbed. "Please help me." The door opened so suddenly I almost fell inside. An elderly woman stood there, her face lined with concern. "Good heavens, child, what's happened to you?" "Please," I gasped, looking back over my shoulder at the dark woods. "There's a man. He hurt my boyfriend. He's coming after me." The woman pulled me inside and locked the door behind me. "Sit down before you fall down," she said firmly, guiding me to a chair by the fireplace. "I'm calling the police." As she went to a landline phone on the wall, I collapsed into the chair, shaking uncontrollably. Through the window, I could see only darkness and fog. Was John out there, watching the cabin? Would he try to break in? The woman was elderly. We wouldn't stand a chance against him. "They're on their way," the woman said, returning to my side. 20 minutes, they said. "I'm Elaine, by the way." "Samantha," I whispered. "My boyfriend, Alex, he's hurt on the road. The man hit him with a wrench. I don't know if he's—" I couldn't finish the sentence. "The police will find him," Elaine assured me, wrapping a blanket around my shoulders. "Now let me look at that ankle." As she examined my swollen ankle, I told her everything, about the fog, picking up John, the car breaking down. She listened silently, her weathered hands gentle but firm as she wrapped an ace bandage around my ankle. "You're lucky you found my place," she said when I finished. "Not many people live out this way anymore." A sudden noise from outside made us both freeze, a cracking sound like a branch breaking. Elaine moved surprisingly quickly for her age, grabbing a shotgun from above the fireplace. "I've lived alone in these woods for 30 years, she said, noting my shocked expression. "A woman learns to protect herself." We waited in tense silence, Elaine standing by the window with her shotgun, me huddled in the chair. The minutes dragged by like hours. Every creak of the cabin, every whisper of wind through the trees outside made my heart rate spike. Finally, we saw flashing lights through the fog. The police had arrived. Everything after that happened in a blur. Officers took my statement. An ambulance was called for Alex, who was found unconscious but alive on the road. And John, they found him trying to steal our car, the keys taken from Alex's pocket. I rode in the ambulance with Alex to the nearest hospital. He had a severe concussion and needed stitches, but the doctors said he would recover. I sat by his bed all night, jumping at every sound, unable to close my eyes without seeing John standing over Alex's body. The next morning, a detective came to take my statement again. After I finished telling him everything, he sighed heavily. "We've been looking for this guy for weeks," he said. "His real name is Jeffrey Parrish. He escaped from a state mental institution about a month ago." My blood ran cold. "Has he done this before?" The detective nodded grimly. "He has a history of targeting hitchhikers. When he couldn't find any, he became the hitchhiker instead. You're lucky you got away. The others—" He trailed off, but I understood what he wasn't saying. Alex was released from the hospital 2 days later. We never made it to the cabin we'd rented. Instead, we went straight back to Chicago, neither of us speaking much during the drive. The doctors said Alex might not remember much of the attack due to the concussion, but I remember everything with perfect clarity. Every word John spoke, every expression on his face, or lack thereof. John, Jeffrey, is back in custody now. The detective assured me he'll be locked away for a long time, but that doesn't comfort me much. I know he's still out there, breathing the same air as me, existing in the same world. The darkness I saw in his eyes hasn't been extinguished. It's just contained behind walls and bars. I haven't slept through the night since it happened. Every time I close my eyes, I hear his voice calling my name through the fog. I've started sleeping with the lights on, and I flinch whenever someone walks behind me. Alex wants us to see a therapist, and maybe we will, but I'm not sure anyone can help me unknow what I now know. That people like John exist, walking among us, empty inside except for the urge to hurt others. We're canceling our lease next month and moving to a busier neighborhood. I don't drive alone anymore, and I've started taking self-defense classes. Small changes that probably won't make a difference if someone like John decides to target me again, but they help me feel like I'm doing something. I still don't know why he chose us that night. Was it random chance? Or did he see something in us, in me, that marked us as prey? I'll never know, and maybe that's the most terrifying part of all. Story 3. I've thought about sharing this for years, but it's hard to put into words what happened that night in November 2008. I'm finally ready to talk about it. Partly because I need to get this off my chest, and partly because I think other drivers should know what kind of monsters are out there. I've been a long-haul trucker for almost 30 years. Back then I was 53 and thought I'd seen it all on the road. Montana's Bitterroot Range was nothing new to me. I'd hauled freight through those mountains dozens of times, even in bad weather. But that night in Deadfall Canyon was different. The weather forecast had called for snow, but nothing major. By the time I hit the canyon around 2 in the morning, it was turning into a full-on blizzard. Visibility was dropping by the minute, and the road was getting slick. I called dispatch around 3 to let them know I might need to pull over if things got worse. The refrigeration equipment I was hauling wasn't time-sensitive, so safety came first. By 4 in the morning, the snow was really coming down. I remember checking my GPS. I was making terrible time. The defroster was barely keeping up, and I had to lean forward to see through the small, clear patch on my windshield. The wipers were caked with ice that made this horrible scraping sound every few seconds. I called dispatch one last time at 4:17. I remember looking at the dashboard clock to tell them I was going to find a pullout and wait for conditions to improve. "This is getting nasty, Carol," I told the night dispatcher. "Can't see more than 20 feet ahead. I'm going to find somewhere to pull over before I end up in a ditch." "Good call, Vic," she said. "Safety first. Check in when you're parked." I never made that call. About 20 minutes later, I spotted a wide turnout area through the snow. It was one of those scenic overlooks, though you couldn't see anything but white that night. I carefully pulled in, set my brakes, and shut down the engine. The sudden silence was almost shocking after hours of engine noise and howling wind. I figured I'd try to get some sleep while waiting out the storm. I made a quick sandwich from my cooler and poured some coffee from my thermos. I remember taking a bite and thinking I should text my wife to let her know I was stopping for the night. That's when I noticed headlights in my side mirror. Another vehicle was pulling into the turnout behind me. I wasn't surprised. In weather like that, any safe place to stop is welcome. But something felt off when I saw it was a smaller vehicle, not another semi. In that weather, at that hour, on that road. Mostly just trucks use that route, especially at night. The vehicle stopped about 30 feet behind me. Through the snow and darkness, I could just make out that it was some kind of SUV. Then a light bar on its roof started flashing. Blue and red. Police. My first thought was relief. If conditions were bad enough that highway patrol was pulling people over to wait out the storm, I'd made the right call, stopping. I took another bite of my sandwich and watched in my mirror, expecting the officer to stay in his vehicle or maybe come check on me. After about a minute, I saw a figure get out and start trudging through the snow toward my truck. I set my sandwich down on the dashboard and grabbed my logbook, figuring he'd want to see it. The wind was really howling outside, snow swirling around this person as they approached my driver's side door. When the knock came, I hit the window button. Nothing happened. Of course, I'd turned the engine off. I fumbled for my keys, started the truck just enough to get power, and lowered the window about halfway. The man standing there had a flashlight that he kept pointed at my face so I couldn't see him clearly. He was wearing what looked like a police jacket and had some kind of badge hanging around his neck. "Officer," I nodded. "Bad night to be out." "License and registration," he said flatly. His voice was odd, like he was trying to sound more authoritative than he was. I reached for my wallet. "Mind pointing that light somewhere else? Can't see a thing." He lowered the flashlight slightly and I got my first good look at him. Something was wrong. His uniform didn't look quite right. The patch on his shoulder was generic, not Montana Highway Patrol or County Sheriff. The badge hanging from his neck looked cheap, like something you'd buy at a costume shop. Before I could process this, he said, "I need you to step out of the vehicle, sir. We've had reports of trucks matching your description involved in contraband transport." My stomach dropped. In almost 30 years of driving, I'd been stopped plenty of times for inspections, but this felt wrong. Way wrong. His tone, his appearance, the fact that he was alone in the middle of nowhere during a blizzard. No department would have an officer out here alone in these conditions. "Can I see your ID first, officer?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He hesitated, then raised the flashlight back into my eyes. "Step out of the vehicle now, sir. This is not a request." I'm not sure what would have happened if I'd opened that door. Thank God I didn't. Instead, I said, "I'm going to call dispatch to confirm this stop, standard procedure," and reached for my CB radio. That's when everything went sideways. The officer suddenly lunged toward my partially open window with something in his hand. I saw a flash of metal and heard a crackling sound, a stun gun. I jerked back just as it sparked through the opening, missing me by inches. Pure adrenaline took over. I slammed the gear shift into drive and hit the gas. My tires spun on the icy pavement, and for a terrifying moment I thought I was stuck. The man was trying to reach through my window. I felt his fingers grasp my jacket, and I yanked away hard. That's when my coffee spilled across the seat and my sandwich fell to the floor. The tires finally caught, and the truck lurched forward. I heard him shout something as I pulled away, but the wind swallowed his words. I was driving blind into a blizzard, but anything was better than staying there with him. In my panic, I wasn't thinking clearly. The road curved sharply just past the turnout, and I was going too fast. The trailer started to slide. I felt the sickening sensation of losing control as nearly 40 tons of truck and cargo began to jackknife on the icy road. I remember hitting the guardrail, the crunch of metal, the shattering glass. The world tilted and spun, then blackness. When I came to, I was confused. I was cold, colder than I'd ever been. There was something wet on my face. Snow. I was lying in snow. It took me several moments to realize I wasn't in my truck anymore. I tried to move and felt a sharp pain in my side. Broken ribs, probably. My head was pounding, and when I touched it, my fingers came away sticky with blood. I was at the bottom of a steep slope, at least 50 feet below the road. I could just make out the dark shape of my truck above, crumpled against the guardrail. Then I remembered the man, the fake cop. I tried to stand but fell back with a groan. Looking around, I realized I was in serious trouble. The snow was getting deeper by the minute. I was injured, and I had no idea if that man was still up there, maybe even looking for me. I don't know how long I lay there, drifting in and out of consciousness. The cold was actually numbing the pain, but I knew that was a bad sign. I needed to move or I'd freeze to death. With enormous effort, I managed to get to my feet. My right ankle screamed in pain when I put weight on it, but I could walk. Sort of. I looked up at the road, but there was no way I could climb that slope in my condition. I had two choices. Try to follow the road from below, hoping to find a place to climb back up, or head deeper into the wilderness looking for shelter. With the blizzard still raging and night still upon me, both options seemed like death sentences. Then I saw headlights above. The SUV. He was still there, and he was driving slowly along the edge, scanning the slope with a spotlight, looking for me. I ducked behind a fallen tree, heart pounding. The light swept over my hiding spot, paused, then moved on. I heard the engine rev as he continued down the road. He hadn't seen me, but now I knew I couldn't stay near the road. This man, whoever he was hunting me. I made the only choice I could. I headed into the forest, away from the road, hoping to find some kind of shelter. The next hours were a blur of pain, cold, and fear. I stumbled through snow that sometimes reached my knees, using trees for support. My clothes were soaked through, my extremities numb. But what kept me moving was the knowledge that the alternative was worse, that man was still out there. Just before dawn, I came across what looked like an old hunting cabin. No lights, no smoke from the chimney, but it was shelter. I practically fell through the door. The interior was sparse but dry. A small wood stove, some dusty furniture, canned goods on a shelf. No electricity or running water, but it was salvation. I managed to get a fire going in the stove with shaking hands and peeled off my wet outer clothes. As warmth slowly returned to my body, so did clarity. I needed help. I had no phone, no radio. No one knew where I was. The cabin was miles from the road by now. If I stayed, I might survive a while, but my injuries needed treatment, and eventually the firewood would run out. I must have fallen asleep because I woke with a start to the sound of a vehicle, distant but coming closer, an engine laboring through snow. My blood turned to ice. Somehow he'd tracked me. I moved to the single window and peered out. Through the trees, I could see headlights. The SUV was following what must have been an old logging road that led toward the cabin. How had he found me? Had he seen my tracks? Was it just blind luck? I didn't have much time. I grabbed a can of beans from the shelf, shoved it in my pocket, and slipped out the back door. The snow had finally stopped, but it was deep and treacherous. Each step was agony with my injured ankle, but fear pushed me forward. I heard the SUV stop. A door opened and closed. Then a voice called out, "Mr. Reese? Victor Reese? I know you're here. I'm just trying to help you." His voice was different now, calm, concerned, like he was actually a rescuer, but I knew better. I'd seen the stun gun, felt his hands grabbing at me. This man was a predator. I pushed deeper into the woods, trying to make as little noise as possible. Behind me, I heard the cabin door open, then his voice again, harder now. "You're making this difficult, Victor. You're injured. You won't survive out here. Let me help you." I kept moving, but I was slowing down. The cold was seeping back into my bones. My injured side was on fire with pain. How long could I keep this up? Not long, as it turned out. I'd been moving downhill, hoping to put distance between us, when my foot caught on something hidden beneath the snow. I fell hard, tumbling down a short embankment. The world spun, and when it stopped, I couldn't move. The pain was too intense. I lay there gasping, knowing it was over. Soon he would find my tracks, follow them here, and that would be it. Whatever he had planned for me would happen, and no one would ever know. The snow around me was turning red. I'd reopened the wound on my head, or maybe caused a new one. The world started to fade at the edges. I thought about my wife, my kids, my grandkids. I thought about all the birthdays and holidays I'd miss, all because I pulled over in Deadfall Canyon during a snowstorm. I don't remember much after that. Snippets like a broken film, the crunch of footsteps in snow, a face peering down at me. Not the fake cop, but someone else. Voices on a radio, the thump-thump of helicopter blades. They told me later that a search and rescue team found me, barely alive. Severe hypothermia, blood loss, broken ribs, fractured ankle. They'd been looking for me since my truck was discovered crashed against the guardrail. Said I was nearly 12 miles from the crash site when they found me. The man who'd been hunting me, they caught him 3 states away, trying the same trick on another trucker. His name was Leland Gaines, a reject from police academies who'd created his own twisted version of being a cop. They found files in his apartment, dozens of truckers he'd been stalking, including me, plans for abductions, trophies from his victims. I wasn't his first, but I was his last, the only one who got away. It's been years now, but I still wake up sometimes feeling the cold of that night, hearing his voice calling through the trees. I don't drive long haul anymore, can't bring myself to get back in a rig. Some nights I still feel like I'm running through those woods, knowing that if I stop, he'll find me. I'm sharing this because there are monsters out there on the lonely roads. They wear uniforms sometimes or pretend to be helping. They count on our trust, our isolation. So be careful who you open your door to in remote places. It might save your life, like it saved mine. Story 4. I've never told this story to anyone before, but I need to get it off my chest. I still don't know what happened to me that day, and I'm hoping maybe someone here has experienced something similar or can make sense of it. Last fall, I was driving from Portland to visit my cousin in Missoula. I've done plenty of road trips before. I actually prefer driving to flying. There's something about having control over my journey and being able to stop whenever I want that. I've always loved, or at least I used to love it. I left Portland around 7 in the morning, figuring I'd make it to Missoula by late evening. The first few hours were perfect driving weather, crisp autumn air, clear skies, barely any traffic. I had my playlist going, a thermos of coffee, and was making good time. Then, my GPS started acting weird around eastern Oregon. The screen kept freezing and then jumping ahead. At first, I ignored it. These back highways can be spotty for service, but when I checked my phone as backup, I had no signal at all. Not a big deal, I thought. I'm good with maps and had a general idea where I was headed. Around 2 in the afternoon, I came to a fork in the road I wasn't expecting. The main highway continued straight, but there was this narrow paved road branching off to the right with a weathered green sign that read, Hollow Creek Odd, Interstate 70 Access. I pulled over and checked my paper map, but couldn't find any Hollow Creek Road marked. Still, if it connected to I-70, it would save me at least an hour. I hesitated for a minute. The road looked, I don't know how to describe it, uninviting. It cut through these dense pine trees that seemed to lean over the pavement. But it was still daylight, and I'm not usually one to get spooked easily. Plus, saving an hour seemed worth it. So I turned onto Hollow Creek Road. At first, everything seemed normal. The road was narrower than the highway, but well paved. The trees were thick on both sides, but that's typical for back roads in that part of the country. I noticed mile markers along the side, just simple wooden posts with numbers painted on them. I passed marker 12, then 13, 14, feeling good about my decision. About 20 minutes in, things started getting weird. I passed mile marker 21, but the next one I saw was 18. I figured I must have misread the first one, or maybe they were marking something else. Then I saw marker 20, and after that, 21 again. I slowed down, confused, and definitely saw 21 for the second time. That's when I noticed something else strange, a dead deer on the side of the road. Nothing unusual about roadkill, but I could swear I'd passed the same deer 15 minutes earlier. It was positioned exactly the same way, on its side with its head facing the road. I shook it off and kept driving. Maybe there were just a lot of deer accidents on this road, but the feeling that something was off kept growing. The trees seemed to get thicker, older, and somehow darker, despite it being mid-afternoon. The road started winding more, with tight curves that hadn't been there before. I checked the time. I'd been on this shortcut for over an hour. Even the slowest back road should have connected to the interstate by now. My GPS was completely useless, just showing a blue dot in the middle of green with no roads marked at all. My phone still showed no service. I decided to turn around, but right as I was slowing down to find a spot wide enough, I saw someone on the road ahead. A woman in a red dress was standing on the shoulder, waving her arms frantically. I pulled up beside her and rolled down my window. She looked wrong. Her dress was tattered at the edges, like she'd been walking through brush. Her hair was tangled with small twigs and leaves, but it was her eyes that really got to me. They were wide with panic. "You need to turn back," she said, her voice hoarse. "This road doesn't go where you think it does." "I'm trying to get to I-70, I told her. The sign said, "There is no connection," she cut me off. "Turn around now while you still can." I asked if she needed a ride, but she just backed away from my car, shaking her head. "Turn back," she repeated, and then walked into the trees. I should have listened. God, I should have listened to her. But I convinced myself she was just some local who wasn't right in the head. Maybe a homeless woman or someone on drugs. So instead of turning around immediately, I kept driving, thinking I'd find a wider spot ahead. The road got worse. The pavement was still intact, but it twisted like a snake, turning at impossible angles. I passed the same mile marker, 21, 3 more times, and the same dead deer. Each time I saw it, it seemed different somehow. More decayed, but not in a natural way. The last time I passed it, I swear its head had turned to follow my car. Then my car made a loud popping sound and began to pull to the right. Flat tire, just perfect. I pulled over, cursing my luck. As I got out of the car, the silence hit me. There were no birds, no insects, not even wind in the trees. Just dead silence, and yet not quite silence. As I bent down to look at the tire, I heard what sounded like whispering coming from the woods. I tried to work quickly, getting the spare from my trunk. That's when I noticed movement between the trees, just slight shifts in the shadows at first, but as I cranked the jack, I became certain there were figures moving out there, watching me. I couldn't make out details, just darker patches against the already dim forest, moving in ways that didn't seem human. The whispers grew louder as I worked, though I couldn't make out any words. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped the lug wrench twice. The third time I dropped it, it rolled toward the edge of the road, and I swear I saw a pale, emaciated hand reach out from behind a tree, as if considering whether to take it. I lunged for the wrench and finished changing the tire in record time, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I threw the flat tire and tools into my trunk and practically dove back into the driver's seat. As I started the engine, the woman in the red dress suddenly appeared in front of my car. I hadn't heard her approach. She was just there. Up close, her skin had a gray undertone, and her eyes, they seemed hollow somehow. "You didn't listen," she said, loud enough for me to hear through the closed windows. "Now they're coming for you." I threw the car into drive and swerved around her, flooring it. In my rearview mirror, I saw her standing in the middle of the road, watching me drive away. And behind her, I still get chills thinking about it, was a tall, impossibly thin figure emerging from the trees. It moved all wrong, like its joints bent in directions they shouldn't. I drove faster than I should have on that winding road, constantly checking my mirrors. The gas light came on. I'd been on this road for nearly 3 hours now, and my half-full tank was nearly empty. That made no sense. None of this made any sense. I passed mile marker 21 again, and the same dead deer, which now definitely had its head turned toward the road, its glazed eyes seeming to track my car. The sun was starting to set, casting long shadows through the trees, shadows that seemed to move independently of the swaying branches. My gas gauge dropped to the last bar. I knew I had to do something. This road wasn't taking me anywhere, it was just looping somehow. So when I saw a small dirt turnout, I pulled over. I sat there for a minute, trying to calm down and think. The logical part of my brain was still trying to find rational explanations. Maybe I was just turned around. Maybe I was overtired and seeing things. But deep down, I knew this was something else entirely. I decided to walk a little way down the road to see if I could spot anything helpful, a real mile marker, a sign, anything. I locked my car and started walking, staying in the middle of the road where it felt safest. The pavement felt wrong under my feet, almost like it was subtly shifting, and the whispers from the woods grew louder with each step, still unintelligible but somehow menacing. I walked for about 10 minutes, and that's when I saw it, or rather, didn't see it. The road just stopped, not like it was blocked or closed. It literally ended in a sheer drop-off, a ravine at least 100 feet deep. I stood at the edge, staring down at the jagged rocks below, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. This made no sense. I'd been driving on this road for hours. How could it just end? I turned around to head back to my car and froze. The whispers had stopped. Instead, there was a sound like dry branches breaking, coming from all around me. The trees at the edge of the road seemed to bend inward, and from between them emerged things. I can't call them people. They had the rough shape of humans but moved like insects, with jerky, unnatural motions. Their skin was grey and seemed to hang loosely on their frames, and their faces, God, their faces were just wrong. Eyes too large, mouths too wide. They didn't rush toward me. They just slowly emerged from the trees, forming a loose semicircle, cutting off my path back to the car. I backed up, forgetting about the ravine until my heel met empty air. I windmilled my arms, regaining my balance just in time. That's when the woman in red appeared at the edge of the forest. Up close, in the fading light, I could see that her dress wasn't just tattered. It was stained dark in places, and her eyes weren't hollow. They were completely black, no whites at all. "You should have turned back," she said, her voice now sounding like multiple voices speaking in unison. The figures were closing in slowly. I had nowhere to go. Ravine behind me, those things in front of me. I closed my eyes, certain I was about to die or worse. Then, nothing. Just darkness and a sensation of falling that seemed to last forever. I woke up in my car at the original fork in the road, the one where I'd first seen the sign for Hollow Creek Road. My phone showed it was still 2 in the afternoon. My gas tank was half full. There was no sign of a flat tire, but the sign for Hollow Creek Road was gone. In its place was just an overgrown dirt path that looked like it hadn't been used in decades. I drove straight to Missoula without stopping. Taking the main highway, I made it to my cousin's place around 11 that night. I didn't tell him what happened. How could I? I sound crazy even to myself. That was 8 months ago. I've searched for information about Hollow Creek Road online and in local records. Nothing. It's like it doesn't exist. Sometimes I wonder if I hallucinated the whole thing. Carbon monoxide leak in my car maybe, or some kind of weird mini-stroke. But last week I got a letter in the mail, no return address. Inside was a small wooden chip that looked like it had been broken off something larger. Painted on it was the number 21. I don't know what happened to me on that road, but I know it was real, and I know I'm never taking an unmarked shortcut again. Story 5. I still get goosebumps talking about this. It happened last month, but honestly, it feels like yesterday. Every time I close my eyes, I'm back there on that road. I'd just finished my shift at Denny's. I worked the late one, 4 to midnight, but it was closer to 1 in the morning by the time I clocked out. We were short-staffed, and I had to help close. My usual route home is the interstate, but there was construction that night, so I decided to take Route 17 through the Appalachian foothills. It's longer, but I figured it would be faster than sitting in construction traffic at that hour. I've driven that road 100 times before during the day. Never had a problem. It's just a normal 2-lane highway that cuts through some pretty remote areas. But that night was different. My car's a 2008 Chevy Impala, nothing fancy but reliable. The heater works great in winter, which is all I really care about. I remember turning onto Route 17 and feeling this weird sense of relief. No other cars, no construction workers waving those orange flags, just me and the open road. The moon was almost full, casting this silver light over everything. It was peaceful, you know. Just the hum of my engine and the occasional click of my turn signal when the road curved. I had the radio on low, some late-night talk show, and I was actually enjoying the solitude. Working at a diner means dealing with people all day, so these quiet drives home are kind of my decompression time. Everything was normal until I passed mile marker 43. The air in my car suddenly felt heavy, like when a storm is coming and the pressure drops, except it was inside my car. I remember adjusting my collar because it felt like I couldn't breathe right. My chest got tight. At first, I thought maybe I was having some kind of panic attack, which made no sense because I wasn't stressed about anything. I rolled down the window, thinking fresh air would help. The sound of the wind rushing in was almost deafening, but the air outside felt even heavier, colder too. Way colder than it should have been for October. That's when I saw him, just standing there on the side of the road. A man in what looked like a dark, tattered coat. He wasn't doing anything, just standing perfectly still, facing the road. I only caught a glimpse of him as I drove by, but I swear to God, he turned his head to look at me with these eyes. I can't even describe them properly. They weren't normal. Too big, too reflective in my headlights. Like an animal's eyes, but not. I sped up. I'm not proud of it, but I hit like 85 on that dark road. My hands were sweating on the steering wheel. I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see him somehow behind me, but there was nothing but darkness. After about 10 minutes of driving way too fast, I forced myself to slow down. I felt stupid. It was just some guy on the side of the road, right? Maybe his car broke down. Maybe he was waiting for someone. I was letting my imagination run wild because it was late and I was tired. That's what I told myself. Then I saw her. This woman was standing in the middle of my lane, just standing there. Her clothes were torn and her hair was wild around her face, but it was her expression that made me slam on my brakes. Her mouth was open in this silent scream, her eyes wide with terror. My tires screeched. I swear I was going to hit her. There was no way I could stop in time. I braced for impact, my whole body tensing, but there was nothing. No thud, no impact. When I opened my eyes, the road ahead was empty. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely grip the wheel. I sat there for maybe 30 seconds just trying to breathe. My headlights cut through the darkness ahead, showing nothing but empty asphalt. I checked my mirrors, looked all around the car. Nothing. No one. I convinced myself I was hallucinating from exhaustion. I needed to get home and sleep, that's all. I put the car in drive and continued, much slower now. That's when the fog started rolling in. It wasn't normal fog. It came too suddenly, too thick. 1 minute the road was clear. The next I could barely see 20 feet ahead. It curled around my car like it was alive, pressing against the windows. Then the lights appeared. At first I thought they were headlights from oncoming traffic, but they weren't. They were orbs of light floating in the fog, maybe the size of basketballs. They moved in these hypnotic patterns, weaving back and forth across the road. I slowed almost to a crawl, afraid I'd drive off the road if I took my eyes off them. The orbs drifted closer to my car. 3 of them. They hovered right outside my driver's side window for a moment, pulsing with this soft, bluish light. Then they shot forward and disappeared into the fog. I glanced at the clock on my dashboard. 2:30 in the morning. That couldn't be right. I'd been on Route 17 for over an hour, which meant I should have reached the turnoff to my town already. But the scenery hadn't changed. Same trees, same road, like I was driving in circles. I tried turning on the radio to calm myself down, but all I got was static. I flipped through every station. Static, static, static. Then, through the white noise, I heard what sounded like whispering. Not words exactly, more like the cadence of speech, but muffled and distorted. I turned the radio off. That's when I saw them again. The man and the woman from before standing together on the side of the road. They weren't doing anything, just watching me drive by. Their eyes followed my car, empty, hollow. I didn't slow down this time. I floored it. But it didn't matter how fast I drove. Every few miles, there they were again. Sometimes just one of them, sometimes both. Always watching, always with those same expressions. It was impossible. I was driving at least 60 miles an hour. There's no way they could have gotten ahead of me. At one point, I looked in my rearview mirror and saw them standing at the edge of my headlight's reach, getting smaller as I drove away. I blinked, and they were gone. But a second later, they were there again, still behind me, still the same distance away. The fog got thicker. The orbs of light returned, more of them this time, dozens floating all around my car. My headlights barely penetrated the wall of white ahead. The air in the car was so cold I could see my breath. I was crying by this point, actually sobbing while I drove. I was convinced I was going to die on that road, that I'd be trapped there forever with those things watching me. Then, after what felt like hours, I saw it, an exit sign. I didn't even read where it led. I just took it, nearly skidding as I turned onto the exit ramp. The fog thinned almost immediately. The oppressive feeling lifted. My car clock now read 4:15. I drove through an unfamiliar town, following signs until I recognized where I was. Somehow, I'd exited about 20 miles past where I should have been. It didn't make sense. None of it made sense. The sun was starting to come up by the time I pulled into my driveway. My hands were still shaking so bad I dropped my keys twice trying to unlock my front door. I called in sick to work that day. Spent the whole day researching Route 17. Found some old news articles about disappearances over the years. People whose cars were found abandoned along that stretch of road. A higher than average accident rate near mile marker 43. I take the interstate now, no matter how bad the traffic is. Nothing could make me drive Route 17 again. Sometimes when I'm falling asleep, I see those eyes watching me from the darkness. I hear that static-filled whispering. I don't know what happened to me that night. I don't know who or what those figures were, but I know they're still there, waiting on that lonely stretch of highway for the next person who decides to take the quiet route home. Story 6. I've debated posting this for years, but I need to get it off my chest. It's been almost 9 years since it happened, and I still check my attic weekly. Still can't sleep without a light on. Still wake up in cold sweats thinking I hear scratching above my ceiling. I was living alone in a small house in Smithtown, Long Island, back in October of 2014. It was my first place after my divorce. Nothing fancy, just a modest 2-bedroom with a small yard backing up to a wooded area. I loved that house despite its quirks. The heating was spotty, and sometimes the pipes made these awful groaning sounds, but it was mine. I'd finally gotten used to living by myself after 15 years of marriage. It started with small things I brushed off, the feeling of being watched while gardening, thinking I saw movement at the edge of the woods, coming home to find a window I thought I'd closed slightly open. Normal stuff you can explain away when you live alone. Then came the noises. The first night I heard it, I was drifting off to sleep when a soft thump came from above my bedroom. My eyes shot open, and I lay frozen, listening. Nothing for a minute, then a subtle scraping sound, like something being dragged very slowly. I told myself it was raccoons or squirrels. The house was old, and the realtor had mentioned critters occasionally finding their way into attics during fall. I banged on the ceiling with a broom handle, and the noise stopped, but it came back the next night, and the night after. Always starting around 11:30, always above my bedroom, scratching, soft footsteps. Sometimes what sounded like something heavy being shifted very carefully. After a week, I called my landlord, who sent over a pest control guy. He found nothing, no droppings, no nests, no signs of animals at all. He checked the small access hatch in the hallway ceiling and said everything looked undisturbed. I remember feeling embarrassed as he gave me that look people give women who live alone, like I was just being jumpy. Probably just the house settling, ma'am. These older places make all kinds of noises. But it wasn't the house settling. Deep down, I knew it wasn't. By late October, I started noticing other things. Items slightly moved from where I'd left them. A coffee mug on a different side of the table. My hairbrush not quite where I remembered placing it. The shower being slightly damp when I came home from work, though I always dried it after using it. Then the phone calls started. They always came when I was home alone, usually in the evening. I'd answer, and there would be nothing but silence on the other end. Sometimes I thought I could hear breathing. After the third call like this, I contacted the phone company, but they couldn't trace the calls. They showed up as unknown number. I started sleeping with my bedroom door locked and a chair propped under the handle. I bought new deadbolts for all the exterior doors. I even considered getting a dog, but my work schedule as a bank teller meant long hours, and it wouldn't be fair to the animal. The breaking point came on November 18th. I remember the date precisely because it was the day before my birthday. I'd worked late, stopping at the store on the way home to buy myself a small cake and a bottle of wine. I was exhausted and fell asleep on the couch watching TV. When I woke up around 2 in the morning, something was on my coffee table that hadn't been there before. A Polaroid photograph of me sleeping on that very couch, taken from somewhere inside my living room. Someone had been in my house while I slept. Someone had stood over me, taken a picture, and left it for me to find. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. A strange, cold clarity washed over me. I grabbed my car keys and phone and left immediately, driving straight to the police station in my pajamas. The officer at the desk was a woman named Diane Moretti. I'll never forget her. Mid-40s, dark hair pulled back tight, tired eyes but completely attentive. When I showed her the photo, her whole demeanor changed. "You did the right thing coming straight here," she said, leading me to a small interview room. "Tell me everything, from the beginning." I spent the next hour telling Officer Moretti about the noises, the moved items, the phone calls. As I spoke, she took detailed notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions. She didn't dismiss anything or make me feel crazy. "Miss Cooper," she said when I finished, "I don't want to alarm you, but you're not the first person to report something like this. We've had similar complaints from women in neighboring townships." My blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" "In the last few months, we've received reports from several women living alone, all describing similar disturbances. Noises in the attic or crawl spaces, items moved, the feeling of being watched, and 2 others have received photographs." She arranged for a patrol car to follow me home and for officers to search my house thoroughly. This time, they found something. The access hatch to my attic, which was in the hallway ceiling, had been modified. The screws had been replaced with ones that could be easily removed from above, and when they went up into the attic, they discovered evidence someone had been living there. There was a small area set up near the chimney stack where the roof was highest, a folded blanket, a plastic bottle filled with urine, granola bar wrappers, and most disturbing of all, a small hole drilled into the ceiling, positioned directly above my bed. The officers found something else too. Behind the insulation was a small backpack containing a police scanner, more Polaroid film, a notebook filled with details about my daily routine, and a small calendar with dates circled, including the day before when the photo was taken. I stayed in a hotel that night while crime scene technicians processed my house. Officer Moretti called me the next morning. "We need you to come in," she said, her voice grim. "We've made an arrest, and we need you to identify some items." At the station, Officer Moretti explained they'd arrested a man named Thomas Grayson early that morning. He'd been spotted by a patrol car walking out of the wooded area behind my neighborhood carrying a backpack. When they stopped to question him, he ran. Inside his backpack were more photographs, not just of me, but of other women too. Grayson had worked as an emergency dispatcher until 2013 when he was fired for inappropriate conduct. He'd been using his access to 911 calls to identify women who lived alone and seemed vulnerable. Then he'd stalk them, learning their routines before finding ways to access their homes, usually through attics or crawl spaces. Officer Moretti spread several items on the table. "Do you recognize any of these as yours?" My stomach lurched. My missing blue hair elastic, a lipstick I thought I'd lost, a single earring I assumed had fallen down a drain, and most horrifying, a pillowcase from my bed that I hadn't even noticed was gone because I had identical spares. As the investigation continued over the next few weeks, the full extent of Grayson's activities emerged. He'd been systematically stalking multiple women throughout Suffolk County. He lived nomadically, spending days at a time in different victims' homes, watching them through holes or vents he'd created. He'd enter their living spaces while they slept, taking small items as souvenirs. In my house, he'd been living for nearly 3 weeks. 3 weeks. The technicians found evidence he'd been coming and going through a small gap in the soffit near the back of the house, where he could slip in from the woods without being seen. During his psychiatric evaluation, Grayson claimed he wasn't trying to harm anyone. He said he was protecting us by watching over us while we slept. He had particularly fixated on Officer Moretti, who he'd first encountered when she responded to a noise complaint at his apartment before he was evicted. They found a separate notebook dedicated entirely to her. I learned that while in my attic, he would watch me through that hole for hours. He'd come down into my house while I was at work, using my shower, trying on my clothes, sleeping in my bed, and on at least 6 occasions, he'd stood in my bedroom doorway, watching me sleep. The trial was brief. Grayson pleaded guilty to multiple charges, including stalking, breaking and entering, and voyeurism. He was sentenced to 25 years. The judge called his actions a profound violation of the sanctity and safety of home. I sold my house at a loss and moved to an apartment building with security. I spent thousands on therapy. I installed cameras everywhere. I still check closets and under the bed every night. But the worst part isn't knowing he was there. It's wondering how long he would have stayed if he hadn't been caught. It's wondering what his end game was. It's wondering if I ever truly woke up during one of his nighttime visits and mistook the shape in my doorway for a shadow or a hanging robe. Sometimes I still feel watched. Sometimes I still hear noises I can't explain. Sometimes I wake up certain someone is standing over me. The rational part of my brain knows Grayson is locked away. The primal part of my brain will never feel safe again. If you live alone, especially near wooded areas, check your attic, check your crawl spaces, look for signs of disturbance in the dust or insulation. Check that your access points are secure. Listen to your instincts when something feels wrong, because the most terrifying thing about my experience isn't that a monster got into my house. It's that he looked like an ordinary man. He lived above my head for weeks, and if he hadn't left that photo, I might never have known he was there at all. Story 7. I still can't explain what happened to me last month on Highway 281. I've tried talking to a few close friends about it, but they just give me that look. You know the one, where they're trying to decide if I'm making it up or if I need professional help. So I figured I'd share it here since you guys seem more open to these kinds of experiences. It was a Thursday night, or I guess technically early Friday morning. I'd been visiting my brother in Houston for a few days, helping him move into his new apartment. By the time we finished setting up his furniture and had a few beers, it was already past midnight. I had to be back in Austin for work the next day, so around 1 in the morning, I decided to just drive back rather than crash at his place. My brother thought I was crazy to start the drive that late, but I've always been a night owl, and the idea of driving on empty roads was actually appealing. No traffic, no construction delays, just me, my thoughts, and some music. I felt wide awake after chugging an energy drink, so I hopped in my Honda Civic and hit the road. Now, I usually take I-10 to 71 when I make this drive, but my GPS suggested a different route, something about construction or an accident, I don't remember exactly. It recommended Highway 281 as an alternative. I'd never taken it before, but I figured the GPS knew what it was talking about. Big mistake. Everything seemed normal at first. The roads out of Houston were well lit and busy enough even at that hour, but as I got further away from the city, things started to change. The highway narrowed from 4 lanes to just 2, and the streetlights disappeared completely. Before I knew it, I was driving on this pitch-black ribbon of asphalt cutting through what seemed like endless farmland and patches of dense woods. The isolation hit me pretty quickly. My headlights only illuminated about 50 feet ahead, and beyond that was just pure darkness. There were no other cars, no houses with lights on. Nothing to indicate that other humans existed in this part of Texas. I remember thinking it was both peaceful and slightly unnerving at the same time. About 45 minutes into the drive, I realized I hadn't seen another car for at least half an hour. That's when I decided to turn up the radio to keep myself company. But instead of the late-night talk show I'd been half listening to, all I got was static. I tried different stations. Nothing but white noise and occasional bursts of unintelligible sounds. I figured I was just in a bad reception area, so I reached for my phone to put on some music. No signal, not even one bar. I wasn't surprised about not having data, but not even enough signal to make an emergency call. That felt wrong. I placed my phone in the cup holder and tried to ignore the subtle feeling of dread that was starting to build in my stomach. The digital clock on my dashboard read 2:17 a.m. when I first felt it. This weird sensation that I wasn't alone, like someone was watching me. I know how that sounds, but it was so intense that I actually checked my back seat. Nothing there, of course, just my overnight bag. I laughed nervously at myself and focused back on the road, blaming the energy drink and the late hour for making me jumpy. About 30 minutes later, my headlights caught something on the right side of the road. At first I thought it was a deer. They're all over Texas highways at night. But as I got closer, I realized it was person-shaped, just standing there, completely motionless at the edge of the road. I slowed down slightly, wondering if it was someone whose car had broken down, but something felt off. The figure was just standing there, facing the road, not waving for help, not moving at all, just standing. As I got closer, I could make out that it was tall, maybe 6.5 feet, and thin, too thin, and I couldn't see a face. Where the face should have been was just shadow, even though my headlights were shining right at it. Every instinct in my body screamed danger. I didn't slow down to get a better look. Instead, I pressed the gas pedal harder and sped past it. I'm not ashamed to admit that I was too scared to even look in the direction of the figure as I passed. Once I was about 100 yards past, I checked my rearview mirror, half expecting to see the figure walking after my car or something equally terrifying. But there was nothing there. The spot where it had been standing was empty. I blinked hard, wondering if my tired mind had just conjured up the whole thing. Maybe it had been a mailbox or a road sign that my brain had transformed into a person. I tried to calm myself down. I was tired, it was dark, and the human mind is known for seeing patterns and faces where there aren't any. I even started to feel a bit silly for getting so spooked. I turned the air conditioning up, hoping the cold air would help keep me alert and focused. That's when my headlights flickered, just for a second, so brief I might have imagined it, but the road ahead went completely dark, before the lights came back on. I tapped the steering wheel nervously, silently begging my reliable old Honda not to choose this particular stretch of nowhere to have electrical problems. The next 15 minutes were uneventful, and I started to relax again. I even tried singing to myself to break the oppressive silence in the car, but then my headlights flickered again, longer this time, maybe 2 or 3 seconds of complete darkness. When they came back on, my blood turned to ice. There, standing directly in the middle of the road, about 50 yards ahead, was the figure. I slammed on the brakes, coming to a stop about 20 yards from it. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel. The figure was just standing there, perfectly still, in the same position as before. I hit the horn, thinking that if it was a real person, they'd react, jump, move, something. Nothing. It didn't even flinch. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 30 seconds, trying to decide what to do. Part of me was tempted to turn around and speed back the way I came, but the thought of driving back through that darkness for hours was even more terrifying. I decided to inch forward, thinking maybe I could drive around it. I took my foot off the brake and let the car roll forward slowly. That's when it moved. I don't know how else to describe what I saw except to say that it moved wrong. It didn't walk or run, it just glided, like it was on wheels or floating just above the ground, and it was moving toward my car. I panicked. I floored the accelerator, swerving to the left to avoid the figure. As I zoomed past, I caught a glimpse of it from the corner of my eye. I still couldn't see a face, just darkness where features should be. But I had the distinct impression it had turned its head to follow my car. I drove like a maniac after that, going way over the speed limit, constantly checking my mirrors to see if the thing was somehow following me. My hands were slick with sweat on the steering wheel, and I could hear my own breathing fast and shallow in the silent car. After about 10 minutes of driving as fast as I dared on the unfamiliar road, I saw something that made me almost cry with relief. Lights up ahead. As I got closer, I could make out a small gas station with a single flickering neon sign that read, "Open 24 HRS." I pulled in so fast I nearly hit the solitary gas pump. The station was ancient, probably built in the 70s and barely updated since, but at that moment, it looked like heaven to me. I practically fell out of my car in my rush to get inside. Behind the counter was an old man with a face like weathered leather and a gray beard that reached his chest. He barely looked up from his paperback book when I burst in, breathing hard and probably looking like I'd seen a ghost. "Trouble on the road?" he asked, marking his place in the book with a calloused finger. I tried to sound casual as I grabbed a bottle of water from a nearby cooler. Just, needed a break and some gas. My voice was shaking, giving me away. The old man studied me for a moment, then sighed. "You saw something out there, didn't you? On 281. I froze with the water bottle halfway to the counter. "What do you mean?" "People come in here sometimes, looking just like you do now, especially ones who ain't from around here taking 281 at night." He shook his head slowly. "Let me guess, figure standing by the road? Or maybe in it?" I felt my skin prickle with goosebumps. "How did you know that?" He shrugged. "Been happening for years. Some folks say they're ghosts, others say they're something else entirely. Whatever they are, they only come out at night, and they seem to like scaring the hell out of drivers." He rang up my water. "That'll be $1.79. I handed him a $5 bill, my mind racing. "Has anyone ever, I don't know, been hurt by these things?" The old man's expression darkened slightly. "Not that I know of, but I wouldn't recommend stopping to find out." He handed me my change. "You heading to Austin? Stay on this road for another hour, and you'll start seeing signs for it. Don't take any side roads, no matter what your GPS tells you." I thanked him, filled up my gas tank, and got back on the road. His casual confirmation of what I'd seen was somehow more disturbing than the experience itself. If he was right, these entities, or whatever they were, had been terrorizing drivers for years. Why hadn't I ever heard about this before? The rest of my drive was uneventful. No more flickering headlights, no more figures on the road. I made it back to Austin just as the sun was coming up, exhausted but safe. I've spent the last month trying to research Highway 281 hauntings or strange phenomena, but I haven't found much beyond a few vague forum posts and local legends. I don't know what I saw that night. I don't know if it was something supernatural or just my tired mind playing tricks on me. But one thing's for sure, I'll never take Highway 281 again, especially not at night. And whenever someone mentions taking a shortcut through rural Texas, I find myself warning them to stick to the main highways. Some roads are better left untraveled after dark. Some things are better left unseen. And some places seem to harbor entities that exist in that liminal space between reality and nightmare, watching and waiting for unwary travelers to cross their path. Story 8. I still can't wrap my head around what happened to me 3 nights ago. I've been staying at a cheap motel since then, afraid to get back in my car. The battery on my phone is almost dead, and I'm using the last of it to type this all out before I forget any details. Maybe someone here has experienced something similar or can tell me I'm not losing my mind. I was driving from Austin to Phoenix to meet up with some college friends for a weekend trip. It was supposed to be around a 13-hour drive, and I decided to do it straight through the night. I've always been a night owl, and I figured the roads would be empty. Plus, I had loaded up a bunch of true crime podcasts to keep me company. I left Austin around 6 in the evening. The first few hours were fine, normal Texas highway driving, nothing special. I stopped for gas and grabbed some energy drinks and beef jerky. The sun went down, and I settled into the drive, enjoying the solitude. Around 2 in the morning, I was deep into New Mexico. The desert at night has this eerie quality, like you're driving through an alien landscape. My GPS said I could save almost an hour by taking this alternative route that cut through some back roads instead of staying on the interstate. Big mistake. The moment I turned off the main highway, something felt off. The darkness seemed to press in against my car windows. My headlights didn't seem to reach as far as they should. The road was poorly maintained with faded lines and cracked asphalt. I checked the time on my dashboard, 2:13 a.m. I remember thinking I should turn around, but there was nowhere to turn. The road had narrowed, with steep embankments on either side. I figured I'd find a place to turn around up ahead and kept driving. After about 20 minutes, I noticed I hadn't passed a single car going in either direction, not even seen headlights in the distance. The radio started to lose signal, switching between static and fragments of oldies songs. I turned it off and drove in silence. According to my GPS, there should have been a rest stop coming up in about 5 miles. I was looking forward to stretching my legs and maybe splashing some water on my face. But when I reached the point where it should have been, there was nothing. Just more empty road stretching into darkness. That's when I started to feel like I was being watched. It's hard to explain, but it was this prickling sensation on the back of my neck. I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see headlights behind me, but there was only darkness. I must have driven for another hour, but my GPS seemed confused. It kept recalculating, the estimated arrival time getting later and later. Then I saw a sign for Route 6. The sign was old and weathered, not like the standard highway signs. It simply said Route 6 with an arrow pointing to an exit I hadn't noticed approaching. My GPS didn't show any turn here, but I was starting to feel desperate for any sign of civilization. I needed coffee, a bathroom break, and reassurance that I wasn't completely lost. I took the exit, which curved sharply downward before leveling out on a narrow two-lane road. After about a mile, I saw lights up ahead, a small roadside cafe with a flickering neon sign that read, Eats. The building looked like it was straight out of the 50s, with chrome trim and large windows. The parking lot was empty. I pulled in and parked right in front of the entrance. The cafe lights were on, but I couldn't see anyone inside from where I sat. I checked my phone. No signal. The dashboard clock read 3:47 a.m. I sat there for a minute, debating whether to go in. Something about the place felt wrong, but I really needed to use the bathroom and get some caffeine. When I pushed open the door, a little bell jingled overhead. The interior was exactly what you'd expect from an old diner. Red vinyl booths, a long counter with stools, a pie case at one end. But everything looked too perfect, too clean, like a movie set rather than a place that had been serving truckers and travelers for decades. There was no one in sight, but I could hear something sizzling on the grill behind the counter. I called out, "Hello?" And after a moment, a woman emerged from the kitchen. She was tall and unnaturally thin, with pale skin that had a grayish tint under the fluorescent lights. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her eyes looked sunken, like she hadn't slept in weeks, but she was smiling. A wide, unnatural smile that didn't reach those dead-looking eyes. "Sit anywhere you like, honey," she said. Her voice had this strange echo to it, like she was speaking in a much larger room. I chose a booth near the door and sat facing the exit. The vinyl seat was ice-cold against my legs, even through my jeans. The woman brought me a menu, but I just asked for coffee and directions back to the interstate. "Coffee coming right up," she said, still wearing that frozen smile. "As for directions, well, you're already where you need to be." I didn't know what to make of that comment, so I just nodded and watched her walk back behind the counter. The entire cafe was silent except for the soft hum of the lights and that sizzling sound from the kitchen. I realized there was no music playing, no TV, not even the sounds of kitchen equipment you'd normally hear. She brought my coffee in a white ceramic mug. The coffee looked normal, but it smelled wrong, metallic, like blood. I pretended to take a sip, but didn't let it touch my lips. "Bathroom?" I asked, needing an excuse to get up. She pointed to a door at the back of the cafe. "Right through there, honey." The bathroom was small and surprisingly modern compared to the rest of the place. Clean white tiles, a pedestal sink, and a large mirror. I ran the water and splashed some on my face, trying to clear my head. That's when I noticed something in the mirror that made my blood run cold. In the reflection, I could see a window on the wall behind me. A small, square window with dirty glass. But when I turned around, there was no window on the actual wall, just plain white tiles. I looked back at the mirror, and the window was still there. And now I could see something moving outside it. A shadow, darker than the night, shifting back and forth. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I backed away from the mirror, keeping my eyes on that impossible window. The shadow pressed closer to the glass, and though I couldn't make out any features, I had the distinct impression it was looking at me. Then I heard a voice. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Turn around," it whispered. I was frozen in place, unable to move or even scream. The shadow at the phantom window grew larger, as if whatever it was had pressed itself against the glass. "Turn around," the voice repeated, louder this time. There was a knock at the bathroom door that made me jump. "Everything all right in there, honey?" It was the waitress, her voice now lacking any warmth it might have had before. I didn't answer. I couldn't. The knocking came again, harder. I said, "Is everything all right?" Something in her tone made me realize I needed to get out of there immediately. I flushed the toilet to make it seem like I'd actually used it, then quickly washed my hands and opened the door. The waitress was standing there, still smiling that terrible smile. But now her eyes seemed different, completely black, with no whites or irises visible. "Your coffee's getting cold," she said. I mumbled something about needing to get back on the road and hurried past her. I could feel her eyes on my back as I walked to the door, fishing in my pocket for cash to leave on the table. When I looked back, she was still standing by the bathroom door watching me, but now her head was tilted at an impossible angle, as if her neck had been broken. I bolted for the exit, not caring how crazy I looked. I jumped into my car, hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. The engine started on the first try, and I peeled out of the parking lot, tires squealing. In my rearview mirror, I could see the cafe receding into the distance, the neon sign flickering. And then, as I watched, the entire building simply vanished. 1 second it was there, and the next it was gone, leaving nothing but empty desert behind. I drove like a maniac, trying to find my way back to the interstate. The road seemed to stretch endlessly, with no signs or landmarks. My GPS was completely useless, showing me in the middle of nowhere. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes, I saw another sign up ahead. My headlights illuminated it as I approached. Route 6. It was the exact same sign I'd seen before. Same weathered wood, same arrow pointing to an exit. This wasn't possible. I'd been driving straight the whole time. How could I be back at the same place? I drove past the exit, determined not to make the same mistake twice. But about a mile later, the road just ended. A barricade with reflective tape blocked the way, with signs indicating the road was closed for construction. I had no choice but to turn around and take the Route 6 exit. With a growing sense of dread, I followed the now familiar curve downward. And there it was again, the cafe with its "Eats" sign, looking exactly as it had before. The parking lot was still empty. I drove past it this time, hoping the road continued to somewhere else. But after a quarter mile, the pavement gave way to dirt, and then the dirt road simply faded into the desert. I turned around again, my panic rising. As I approached the cafe for the third time, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. Behind the building was what looked like a junkyard filled with cars. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, stretching back as far as I could see in the pre-dawn light. Every make and model imaginable, from what looked like a 1950s Cadillac to modern SUVs, all covered in dust, as if they'd been there for years. That's when I realized what was happening. I wasn't the first person to take this exit, and from the looks of it, none of those other drivers had ever left. I kept driving, passing the cafe again, searching desperately for any other road, any way out. But no matter which direction I went, I somehow ended up back at Route 6, back at that same exit, back at that same cafe. On my 5th or 6th pass, I noticed the waitress standing outside watching me. She raised her hand in a little wave as I drove by, that terrible smile still fixed on her face. The sky was starting to lighten now, though the sun wasn't visible yet. I'd been driving in circles for hours. My gas gauge was getting low, and I was exhausted and terrified. On what I promised myself would be my final attempt, I floored it, pushing my car as fast as it would go down that empty road, determined to break free of whatever loop I was trapped in. The engine made a strange sound, a high-pitched whine I'd never heard before. The steering wheel began to vibrate in my hands. The speedometer climbed, 80, 90, 100 miles per hour. And then, without warning, The engine died. All the dashboard lights went out. The car rolled to a stop in the middle of the road. I tried to restart it, but nothing happened, not even a click. It was as if all the electrical systems had been fried at once. I sat there as dawn broke over the desert, casting long shadows across the landscape. In the growing light, I could see I was exactly where I'd started, right in front of the Route 6 sign. The exit beckoned. The cafe waited. And somewhere behind me, I could hear footsteps approaching on the pavement. I abandoned my car and started walking. I've been walking for 3 days now. Found this motel yesterday. I don't know where I am exactly, but it's not where I'm supposed to be. Nothing looks right. The people here look at me strangely when I ask about Route 6. My car keys disappeared from my pocket. I check constantly, but they're gone. Sometimes I think I can hear that bell jingling from the cafe door. Sometimes I catch a whiff of that metallic coffee. And sometimes when I look in the mirror, I see that window that isn't there, and the shadow, watching. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to get home. All I know is I'm never driving at night again. If you're reading this and you're driving through New Mexico, stay on the interstate. No matter what your GPS says, no matter how much time you think you'll save. And if you see a sign for Route 6, keep driving. Don't slow down, don't look back, because once you take that exit, you might never leave. Story 9. I'll never forget the day Lauren Mitchell's car was pulled from Whitman Creek. It was a cold morning in February 2016, and I'd been with the Elmwood Heights PD for just over 7 years. As a detective, I'd seen my share of accidents, but something about this one bothered me from the start. When I arrived at the scene, rescue workers were already attaching cables to the submerged Honda Accord. The car had broken through the guardrail on Carson Bridge sometime during the night. Standard procedure, we determined. Slippery conditions, possibly a distracted driver, tragic outcome. Lauren's body was still inside, her seatbelt fastened. She was 32, worked at the local credit union. No history of depression or suicidal thoughts, according to her sister. No drugs in her system beyond a blood alcohol level of 0.05, under the legal limit. Open and shut, my partner Marcus said. Probably checking her phone, hit a patch of ice, lost control. I nodded, but something nagged at me. I requested the traffic camera footage from Carson Bridge. Standard procedure, just checking boxes. But when I called the county transportation department, they informed me there had been a system outage at the time Lauren's car went off the bridge, somewhere between 1 and 3 in the morning. Happens sometimes, the clerk told me. System updates, power fluctuations, nothing unusual. I should have left it there. My sergeant was already pressing me to close the case. Accident reports needed filing and new cases were piling up. But that camera outage bothered me. Why that specific time? Why that night? I pulled the maintenance logs for the bridge cameras for the past 6 months. Most people don't realize how much paperwork goes into municipal systems. Every hiccup, every reboot, every service call gets documented. What I found made my stomach drop. 17 documented outages, all between 1 and 3 in the morning, all lasting between 15 and 45 minutes. Could be scheduled maintenance, Marcus suggested when I showed him. They probably do system updates when traffic is lightest. But the transportation department confirmed they didn't schedule regular maintenance in that time slot, and the outages weren't consistently on the same day of the week or date of the month. They were random, except they weren't random at all. I cross-referenced the dates with our incident reports. During 14 of those 17 outages, something had happened in our jurisdiction, mostly minor things. A break-in at a storage facility, a car stolen from a hospital parking lot, 2 fender benders where 1 driver fled the scene, a convenience store robbery, and 3 fatalities, including Lauren Mitchell. The first was a hit-and-run back in September. The victim was Thomas Reeves, a high school math teacher walking home from a bar at 1:30 in the morning. The second was Emilia Santos, whose car was found wrapped around a telephone pole in December. Both cases were unsolved or closed as accidents. I went back and pulled their files. On a hunch, I checked their movements before their deaths. Thomas Reeves had been drinking at the Pines, a bar on Route 16 near the industrial park. Emilia Santos's credit card showed her last purchase had been at the Pines as well. And Lauren Mitchell? Her friend confirmed they'd been at the Pines the night she died, though Lauren had only had 2 drinks before deciding to head home early. I drove out to the Pines that afternoon. It wasn't much, a standalone building with weathered wood siding, neon beer signs in the windows, and a gravel parking lot. At 4 in the afternoon, there were only a few cars outside. Inside, country music played from speakers mounted in the corners, and the smell of fryer oil hung in the air. The bartender was a guy in his early 30s with a neat beard and a flannel shirt. His name tag read Sam. I sat at the bar and ordered a club soda, then flashed my badge. "Just a few questions about some customers," I said, keeping my voice casual. "Lauren Mitchell came in last Wednesday night." Sam nodded, wiping a glass. "Tragic what happened. She was in with her friend Jessie, left early, around midnight." "How'd she seem?" "Fine, maybe a little tired. Said she had an early meeting." "Did she talk to anyone while she was here, besides her friend?" His eyes flickered briefly before he shrugged. "Not really. It was a slow night." I asked about Thomas Reeves and Emilia Santos. He remembered them too. Reeves as a regular who came in for trivia nights, Santos as a woman who'd had an argument with her boyfriend at the bar back in December. "You've got a good memory," I said. Sam smiled. "Part of the job, faces, drinks, stories. You remember it all eventually." I left my card, asking him to call if he remembered anything else. As I was leaving, I noticed the security cameras, one over the bar, one by the door, one in the parking lot. On impulse, I asked to see the footage from the night Lauren was there. "System's been acting up," Sam said. "We had a power surge last week, lost some data. I can check with the owner about getting the backup files." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those camera outages. 17 outages in 6 months. 14 incidents during those blind spots. 3 deaths. All 3 victims had been at the Pines before they died. The next morning, I ran a background check on Samuel Hayes, the bartender. Clean record except for a DUI 7 years back. Former military, communications specialist in the Army. Honorable discharge in 2012. I also looked into the company that maintained our traffic camera system, Westex Security Systems. They had the county contract for 5 years running. 2 days later, I was reviewing Lauren Mitchell's autopsy when something jumped out at me. The medical examiner noted water in her lungs, indicating she'd been alive when the car entered the creek. But there was something else. Trace amounts of flunitrazepam in her system. Rohypnol, the date rape drug. It changed everything. This wasn't an accident. Lauren had been drugged, but her BAC was only 0.05, not enough to impair her significantly. Someone had to have been with her in that car, someone who drove it off the bridge and escaped before it sank. I went back to the Pines and requested their employee records. Sam Hayes had worked every night when our victims had been there. I also requested the service records for the traffic cameras from Westec. The technician who responded to every outage was listed as Alan Watts. I ran Watts through our system. No criminal record, but he had been questioned 5 years earlier in connection with a stalking case that was ultimately dropped when the victim moved away. I checked his social media, limited, but there was a photo from a company picnic 3 years earlier. In the background, sitting at a picnic table, was Sam Hayes. I got a warrant for Hayes' apartment and Watts' home and work records. At Westec, we found that Watts had logged into the system remotely 17 times in the past 6 months, each time creating a deliberate outage by initiating a system reset, all between 1 and 3 in the morning. But it was what we found in Hayes' apartment that made me sick. The place was immaculate, everything organized with military precision. In his bedroom closet, behind a false wall, we found a wooden box containing items that could only be described as trophies. A man's watch, a woman's earring, a credit union ID badge belonging to Lauren Mitchell. There was a leather-bound notebook with detailed entries describing what he called his perfect accidents. He'd been planning them for months. People who had somehow offended him or crossed him. A teacher who'd embarrassed him years ago in high school. A woman who'd argued loudly with her boyfriend and disturbed his favorite song, Lauren Mitchell, who had politely declined his offer to show her a good time after her friend left. The methodology was meticulous. He would identify a target, learn their habits. Watts would ensure a camera outage for the planned night. Hayes would slip his target enough rohypnol to make them compliant but conscious. Then he'd drive them to the pre-selected location and stage the accident. Lauren's entry was the most detailed. She'd rejected him 3 times over the past year. The night she died, he'd added the drug to her second drink. When she said she felt strange and was going to head home, he offered to walk her to her car. Security footage from a gas station a mile from the Pines showed Hayes' truck following her Honda. The cameras at Carson Bridge were down from 1:15 to 2 a.m. Lauren's car went into the water at approximately 1:40. The most disturbing detail came from the coroner's revised report. Lauren had likely been alive, but sedated in the passenger seat when Hayes drove her car to the bridge. He'd moved her to the driver's seat, fastened her seatbelt, locked all the doors, closed the windows, and then sent the car through the guardrail into Whitman Creek. She'd have awakened as the cold water filled the car, too disoriented to escape. When we arrested Hayes, he was at work, as if nothing had happened. He didn't resist, didn't show emotion. When I interviewed him later, he called his victims necessary corrections, people whose rudeness or rejection warranted removal. He spoke about creating blind spots, not just in our surveillance systems, but in people's awareness. How easy it was to make terrible things look like bad luck or carelessness. Watts claimed he didn't know what Hayes was doing with the outages, said Hayes had paid him $500 each time to create a system reset, claiming he needed to move sensitive materials without being recorded. Whether that's true, I don't know. He's facing charges as an accessory. The local press called it the blind spot murders. 17 victims in total. 3 dead, 14 who'd experienced what they thought were random crimes or accidents, all planned by a bartender who kept a logbook of offenses and eliminated problems during carefully coordinated surveillance blackouts. I keep thinking about that camera outage. If the system had been working that night, we'd have seen Hayes driving Lauren's car. We'd have known immediately it wasn't an accident. Instead, she suffered in that sinking car while we all assumed she'd simply lost control on a dark, cold night. The case is closed now, but I still can't sleep well. I keep checking my rearview mirror when I drive home late. I notice every traffic camera, every blind spot in our systems, and I wonder how many other Samuel Hayes are out there waiting for their opportunity in the darkness between 1 and 3 a.m. when they think no one is watching. Story 10. I've been debating whether to share this for weeks now. I'm still shaking as I type this. I don't expect anyone to believe me, but I need to get this off my chest before it consumes me completely. I'm a history major at Elmswood University, and I've always been drawn to local legends and mysteries. When our professor assigned an open research project, I immediately thought of Hollow Creek Manor. Anyone who's grown up in this area knows about it, that massive Victorian mansion hidden in the Blue Ridge Mountains that everyone avoids like the plague. The Harrington family disappeared without a trace back in 1973. One day they were there, the next, gone. The townsfolk had reported strange lights and sounds coming from the property in the days before they vanished. The police investigation found nothing, not a single clue. It was like the earth had swallowed them whole. I convinced my girlfriend Emily to come with me. She's studying photography and thought it would make for some great portfolio shots. My roommate David agreed to tag along too. He's one of those tech guys who doesn't believe in anything supernatural and thought the whole thing would be hilariously stupid. Sarah, who's in my ancient history class, heard us planning and asked to join. She's a psych major doing her thesis on fear responses, so I guess we were her perfect lab rats. Last Saturday was scorching hot, even for June. We parked at the base of the hill around 2 in the afternoon. The humidity was suffocating, my t-shirt sticking to my back before we'd even started the hike up. The manor wasn't visible from the road. You had to follow an old, overgrown path through dense woods for about half a mile. "You sure you know where we're going, Jake?" David kept asking, swatting at mosquitoes. I'd studied old maps of the area for weeks, so I knew exactly where we were headed. When we finally reached the gate, my stomach dropped. It was this massive rusted iron thing with weird symbols worked into the metal. Vines had grown all over it, but you could still make out the details. Faces twisted in what looked like pain or terror. "Welcoming," Sarah muttered, taking photos of the gate with her phone. The gate wasn't locked. It swung open with this awful screeching noise that made my skin crawl. The path leading to the house was completely overgrown with weeds and thorny bushes that seemed to grab at our clothes as we passed. And then we saw it, Hollow Creek Manor. It was so much bigger than I'd imagined. 3 stories of dark stone and rotting wood with these massive windows that seemed to watch us approach. The roof was partially caved in on one side, and ivy covered nearly half the building. It looked like something out of a nightmare, especially with the darkening sky behind it. Emily immediately started taking pictures, circling the building to capture it from different angles. "This place is insane," she kept saying, her voice equal parts excited and nervous. The front door was hanging off its hinges. I'd brought a flashlight, but the late afternoon sun was still providing enough light to see. The foyer was massive, with a grand staircase that curved upward. Half the steps were rotted through, and the banister had collapsed in several places. The smell hit me first, this overwhelming mustiness mixed with something else I couldn't identify. Something sickly sweet underneath, like rotting fruit. Dust particles floated in the beams of sunlight that managed to penetrate the grimy windows. "Looks like nobody's been here in decades," David said, running his finger through the thick dust on a nearby table. He was trying to sound casual, but I could hear the tension in his voice. We decided to split up to cover more ground. Probably the stupidest decision we could have made. Emily and I took the main floor while David and Sarah headed upstairs. The dining room was the creepiest thing I've ever seen. The table was set for dinner. Plates, silverware, glasses, everything. Like the family had been about to eat when they vanished. There were even dried up remains of what might have been food still on some of the plates. The chairs were pushed back at odd angles, as if everyone had gotten up in a hurry. "Jake, look at this," Emily whispered, pointing to one of the glasses. It was still half full of what looked like wine, now dried to a dark crust. "How is this possible? Wouldn't someone have cleaned this up during the investigation?" I had no answer. According to my research, the police had thoroughly searched the place, but here was evidence that no one had touched this room since the night the Harringtons disappeared. As we moved through the house, I kept feeling like someone was watching us. Every time I turned around, I expected to see a person standing there, but there was never anyone. Just empty doorways and shadowy corners. We found the library next. Walls lined with ancient books, many of them fallen from their shelves and rotting on the floor. A massive desk dominated the center of the room, covered in papers and open books. I started examining them, hoping to find some clue about what happened here. That's when we heard Sarah scream upstairs. We raced toward the grand staircase, careful to avoid the broken steps. David was already at the top, his face pale. "She's in the master bedroom," he said, his voice shaking. "She found something." The master bedroom was at the end of a long hallway on the second floor. The door was ajar, and I could see Sarah sitting on the edge of a massive 4-poster bed, holding what looked like a book. "It's Margaret Harrington's diary," she said without looking up. Her hands were trembling. "You guys need to see this." I took the diary from her. The pages were yellow and brittle, but the handwriting was still legible, neat cursive that became increasingly erratic in the later entries. The early entries were mundane, details about managing the household, comments about her husband's business ventures, notes about her children's education. But around March 1973, things changed. "March 15th, I read aloud. "The noises in the walls have gotten worse. Charles says it's just the house settling, but I know better. Something is in there, moving around when we sleep." Emily leaned over my shoulder, reading silently. I flipped through more pages. April 2nd. I saw it today. A shadow that moved on its own, detached from any person or object. It slid across the dining room wall during breakfast. The children saw it too, though Charles refuses to acknowledge it. I don't feel safe anymore. April 23rd. The voices have started. They whisper things I cannot understand, but their tone makes me shudder. They seem to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Charles finally admitted he hears them too. We're considering leaving, but something tells me it won't let us go. The final entry was dated May 10th, 1973, just days before the family's disappearance. It's gotten stronger. The shadows have formed now. I saw one standing at the foot of our bed last night, a tall, gaunt figure that seemed to absorb all light around it. It reached for me with hands that weren't hands at all, but something else, something wrong. Charles wants to perform the ritual tonight. He says it will seal it away forever. I'm terrified it will make things worse instead. If anyone finds this, please know that we tried to stop it. God forgive us for what we've done. As I finished reading, the temperature in the room plummeted. My breath came out in visible puffs, despite it being June. The windows began to rattle violently in their frames. What the hell? David backed away from the windows, bumping into a dresser. That's when we heard it. A low, guttural growl that seemed to come from the walls themselves. It was like nothing I've ever heard before. Not animal, not human, but something else. The bedroom door slammed shut with a bang that made us all jump. David rushed to it, trying to open it, but it wouldn't budge. "It's stuck!" he shouted, throwing his weight against it. The growling intensified, becoming a roar that made my ears hurt. The temperature dropped even further, to the point where I was shivering uncontrollably. "Jake, what's happening?" Emily grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. Before I could answer, the lights went out. Not that there were working lights in the abandoned house, but the natural light from the windows seemed to be swallowed by an unnatural darkness that filled the room like thick smoke. In that pitch blackness, I heard Sarah whimper. "There's something in here with us." I fumbled for my flashlight, finally managing to turn it on. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating a sight that still haunts my nightmares. Standing by the foot of the bed was a woman, or what had once been a woman. Her skin was a sickly grayish white, stretched tight over protruding bones. Her hair hung in lank strands around a face that was both ancient and ageless. She wore a tattered nightgown stained with what looked disturbingly like dried blood. Margaret Harrington. It couldn't be anyone else. She didn't walk. She glided toward us, her feet not quite touching the floor. Her mouth opened in what appeared to be a silent scream, revealing blackened gums and rotting teeth. "Please," Emily sobbed. "Let us go. We didn't mean any harm." Margaret's face twisted into something that might have been a smile, but it was all wrong. Too wide, too many teeth. Her hand reached out toward me, skeletal fingers grasping at the diary I still clutched. I dropped it like it had burned me. The diary hit the floor, pages fluttering open to reveal symbols I hadn't noticed before, drawings in what looked like dried blood in the margins of the final entries. The walls began to pulse, actually moving inward like they were breathing. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to thicken, taking on vague humanoid shapes that writhed and reached toward us. David was still hammering at the door, screaming for help, though there was no one for miles who could hear us. Sarah had collapsed into a fetal position on the floor, her hands over her ears, rocking back and forth. Margaret's form flickered like a bad TV signal, sometimes solid, sometimes transparent. She bent down, her movements jerky and unnatural, and picked up the diary. When she straightened, her face was inches from mine. I could smell her. Decay and something metallic like blood. Her eyes were completely black. No whites at all, just endless pits of darkness. Her mouth opened again, wider than any human mouth should be able to, and a sound came out. Not words, but a high-pitched keening that made my head feel like it was going to split open. The The shadows surged forward, enveloping Emily first. She screamed. God, that scream will stay with me forever, as the darkness seemed to flow into her mouth, her nose, her eyes. Then David, then Sarah. I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't move. I was paralyzed, forced to watch as my friends were consumed by whatever lived in those walls. Margaret's hand clamped around my wrist, her touch like ice burning into my skin. The last thing I remember clearly is her face morphing, changing into something that wasn't human at all, something ancient and hungry and patient. Then darkness. I woke up alone on the forest floor at the base of the hill, the morning sun filtering through the trees. My phone showed it was 6:37 in the morning. Somehow I'd lost over 12 hours. I ran back up to the manor, screaming my friends' names. The gate was open just as we'd left it, but when I reached the house, it looked different. More decayed, more sinister in the morning light. The front door was now solidly boarded up, not hanging off its hinges like the day before. There was no sign of Emily, David, or Sarah. Just a single camera, Emily's, lying in the overgrown grass near the front steps. I grabbed it and ran all the way back to my car, not stopping once. When I finally got home and checked the camera, there were no pictures of the manor's interior, just shadows and blurry shapes that made no sense. I called the police immediately. They've been searching for 3 days now. They found our footprints leading up to the manor, but no signs of anyone inside. According to them, the house has been securely boarded up for decades. They think my friends are playing an elaborate prank or that I'm lying, but I know what I saw. I know what happened in that house. The strangest part. The burn mark on my wrist where Margaret grabbed me. It's not healing. It's getting worse, spreading slowly up my arm in patterns that look disturbingly like the symbols from the diary. And sometimes, at night, I hear whispering coming from my walls. Story 11. I still can't explain what happened to me 3 days ago. I've barely slept since then. Every time I close my eyes, I hear that goddamn humming. I'm writing this down hoping someone might understand or at least believe me. I was driving from Houston to Los Angeles for a new job. Nothing fancy, just an IT position that paid better than what I had in Texas. I decided to make a road trip out of it. Thought it would be fun to see some of the country, take my time getting there. My old Honda Civic isn't much to look at, but it's reliable, and I'd packed enough snacks and water to keep me going. The first couple days were actually pretty nice. I stopped at some tourist traps, took pictures of weird roadside attractions, that kind of thing. By the third day, though, I was getting tired of driving. I just wanted to get to LA already. It was getting late, around 9:45 at night, when things started to get weird. I was somewhere between El Paso and Tucson on Highway 10. If you've never driven through that stretch of desert at night, it's like being on another planet. Just endless darkness on both sides of the road, occasionally broken up by the silhouette of a cactus or rock formation when my headlights hit them just right. I hadn't seen another car for at least 30 minutes. My phone showed no service, not even a single bar. I tried the radio, but all I got was static. I flipped through every station, but nothing came through, just white noise. So I put on a playlist I had downloaded just to have some sound in the car besides the hum of the engine and the wind. That's when I saw her, just standing there on the side of the road, arm outstretched, thumb up, a hitchhiker in the middle of nowhere. I almost didn't stop. Everything about the situation felt wrong. Who the hell would be hitchhiking on this empty stretch of highway at night? But something about seeing her there, all alone in my headlights, made me feel guilty. What if she was in trouble? What if she'd been stranded? I drove past her at first. In my rearview mirror, I could see her still standing there, not moving, just watching my taillights get smaller. I cursed under my breath and slowed down, then made a U-turn. I don't know why I did it. I've never picked up a hitchhiker before. As I pulled up alongside her, I got my first good look. She was maybe in her mid-20s, wearing jeans and a faded red hoodie. She had a small backpack slung over one shoulder. Her face was, I don't know how to describe it. Not exactly pretty, not exactly plain, just empty somehow. Her eyes looked hollow, like she hadn't slept in days, and her skin was so pale it almost looked blue in my headlights. I rolled down the passenger window. "Where are you headed?" I asked. She stared at me for a moment too long before answering. "West," she said, her voice barely audible over the engine. "I'm going to Los Angeles," I told her. "I can take you as far as you need." She nodded and opened the door without another word. As she slid into the passenger seat, I noticed how fluid her movements were, almost unnaturally smooth. She put her backpack at her feet and pulled the door shut. "I'm Mark," I said, trying to break the awkward silence as I pulled back onto the highway. She didn't respond, just stared straight ahead at the road. "Do you have a name?" I asked after a minute. "Emma," she said, still not looking at me. Her voice was soft but flat, completely devoid of emotion. I tried making small talk, asked where she was coming from, why she was headed west, if she had family in California. She only gave one-word answers or didn't respond at all. After a while, I gave up and just focused on driving. The music from my phone played quietly through the car speakers, some indie rock playlist I'd put together for the trip. We drove in silence for about 20 minutes. The road stretched endlessly ahead, my headlights cutting through the darkness. Occasionally, the light would catch the reflective eyes of some animal watching from the side of the road, a coyote maybe, or a rabbit. The desert at night is alive in ways you don't expect. "Do you hear them?" Emma suddenly asked, breaking the silence. I glanced over at her. "Hear what?" "The voices," she said, as if it was the most normal thing in the world. "They're always singing out here." I felt a chill run down my spine. "I don't hear anything except the music," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She turned to look at me then, and I swear her eyes seemed darker than before, like the pupils had expanded to fill the entire iris. "You will," she said. I turned the music up a little, trying to drown out the unease that was building in my chest. The song that was playing, something upbeat by the Killers, suddenly seemed too loud, too jarring against the quiet darkness outside. That's when Emma started humming. It wasn't in tune with the music. It wasn't in tune with anything I recognized. It was this weird atonal sound that somehow seemed to cut through the song playing on the speakers. I can't really describe the melody, if you could even call it that. It was like she was humming several notes at once, which I know is impossible, but that's what it sounded like. "Could you not do that?" I asked, trying to keep the irritation out of my voice. "It's kind of distracting." She stopped, but she was staring at me again with those two dark eyes. "They're coming," she said after a moment. "The ones who sing." My hands tightened on the steering wheel. "What are you talking about?" She didn't answer. Instead, she started humming again, that same unsettling tune. Only now, it seemed to be coming from underneath the music playing on my phone, like it was embedded in the song itself. I reached over and turned off the music completely, but I could still hear the humming. It wasn't coming from Emma anymore. Her lips weren't moving. It was coming from everywhere, from the air vents, from outside the car, from the road itself. "What the fuck is happening?" I said, my voice rising in panic. "What is that sound?" Emma smiled for the first time since I'd picked her up. It wasn't a friendly smile. It stretched too wide across her face, showing too many teeth. "They're almost here," she said, and her voice had changed. It had this weird echo to it now, like there were multiple voices layered on top of each other. That was it. I'd had enough. "Get out," I said, pulling over to the side of the road. "Right now. Get out of my car." She didn't move, just kept staring at me with that horrible smile. The humming was getting louder, more insistent, like it was pressing in on the car from all sides. "I said get out," I shouted, reaching across her to open her door. As my arm passed in front of her, she grabbed my wrist. Her hand was ice cold, not just cool, but literally freezing, like she'd been keeping it in a bucket of ice. The cold burned into my skin, and I tried to pull away, but her grip was inhumanly strong. "They're already here," she said, and when I looked into her eyes, they were completely black. No whites, no iris, just bottomless pits of darkness. I don't remember exactly how I got away from her. I think I used my other hand to hit the seatbelt release, then shoved her hard toward the open door. She let go of my wrist, and I practically fell out of the driver's side door, stumbling onto the gravel at the side of the road, and then I ran. I just fucking ran into the desert, away from the road, away from my car, away from whatever the hell Emma was. I could hear singing now, not humming, but actual singing. Multiple voices, all in perfect unison, performing that same alien melody that Emma had been humming. It was coming from everywhere and nowhere, filling the night air around me. I ran until I couldn't hear the singing anymore, until my lungs were burning and my legs felt like they were about to give out. Finally, I stopped and looked back toward the road. My car was still there, headlights still on, illuminating a small patch of asphalt. The passenger door was open, but there was no sign of Emma. She was gone. I stood there in the desert, surrounded by darkness, trying to catch my breath and figure out what to do. My phone was still in the car, along with my wallet and everything else I owned. But the thought of going back to that car made my skin crawl. Eventually, I worked up the courage to return to the road. I approached the car cautiously, half expecting Emma to jump out at me, but there was no one there. The passenger seat was empty. Her backpack was gone too, if it had ever really been there at all. I got back in the car, slammed the door shut, and locked it. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. As soon as the engine started, I floored it, desperate to get as far away from that spot as possible. I drove non-stop until I reached a gas station outside of Tucson. It was nearly dawn by then. The guy working the night shift gave me a weird look when I burst in, probably because I looked like I'd seen a ghost. In a way, I guess I had. I've made it to LA now, started my new job trying to act like everything's normal, but it's not. Sometimes when I'm alone in my apartment at night, I can hear that humming again, faint but unmistakable, coming from just outside my window. And sometimes when I look in the mirror, I swear my eyes look darker than they used to. I don't know what Emma was or what those ones who sing are. I don't know if they followed me here or if I just imagined the whole thing, but I know I'll never pick up another hitchhiker again, and I know I'll never drive through the desert at night if I can help it, because whatever's out there, whatever was singing in the darkness, I think it's still listening for me. Story 12. I've been driving semis for 15 years now. 15 long years on the road, and I've seen some weird shit in my time. Wildlife where it shouldn't be, strange lights in the sky, hitchhikers that give you the creeps. But nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, compares to what happened to me last October on Highway 87 in Montana. I'm writing this down because I need someone else to know. I can't keep carrying this alone. My therapist thinks it's PTSD from too many lonely nights on the road, but she doesn't understand. She wasn't there. It was October 28th, and I was hauling a load of electronics from Great Falls to Billings. The weather had turned nasty. Not quite snowing, but that cold, misty rain that makes the asphalt shine like black glass under your headlights. I'd been driving since early afternoon, and darkness had settled in a couple hours earlier. Highway 87 cuts through some of the most isolated country you can imagine. Miles and miles of nothing but rolling hills, scattered ranches, and the occasional small town. That night, the traffic was almost non-existent. I'd maybe passed 3 cars in the last hour. Around 11 at night, I first noticed the headlights behind me, just a pair of yellowish beams in my mirrors hanging back maybe a quarter mile. Nothing unusual about that, except they'd been there for nearly 40 minutes without passing or falling back. The highway was empty, and there were plenty of straightaways where they could have gone around me if they wanted to. I didn't think much of it until the truck suddenly sped up and got right on my tail. And I mean right on my tail. Couldn't have been more than 20 feet from my bumper. Dangerous as hell when I'm hauling 70,000 pounds. I could finally make out it was an old pickup. Looked like maybe a 70s or 80s Ford. all rusted out around the edges. Its headlights flickered strangely, like they were about to die, and the right one seemed to be aimed too high. "Back off, asshole," I muttered, tapping my brakes just enough to flash my taillights as a warning. The pickup fell back a little, but stayed behind me. After about 5 more miles of this cat-and-mouse bullshit, I rounded a bend and suddenly, the pickup was gone. Just disappeared. I figured maybe they'd turned off on some unmarked road, and I felt myself relax a little. That relief lasted exactly 12 minutes. I came around another curve, and there on the shoulder of the road was that same damn pickup, hazard lights blinking. Someone was standing beside it, just a dark silhouette in my headlights. Now, I'm not the type to stop for strangers at night, especially in the middle of nowhere, but I'm also a trucker, and there's a code. We look out for each other out here because sometimes we're all each other has. So I slowed down, thinking maybe they needed help. Could be a fellow driver, broken down with no cell service. As I pulled over about 50 feet ahead of them, I immediately felt something was wrong. My skin got all prickly, like static electricity was building up. The air in my cab seemed to get thicker, harder to breathe. I grabbed my flashlight and my knife, never leave the truck without it, and stepped down from the cab. The night was dead silent. No wind, no distant traffic, not even insects. Just my boots crunching on the gravel shoulder. "Hey there," I called out, keeping my distance. "You need some help?" The figure turned toward me, and that's when I got my first good look. It was a man, but wrong somehow. Tall and gaunt, wearing clothes that seemed too old and tattered for the weather. Faded jeans, a flannel shirt with the sleeves partly torn off, and a trucker cap pulled low. But it was his face that made my stomach drop. His eyes were hollow, not just dark, but empty-looking, like 2 black holes punched in a sheet of paper. His skin was a grayish white, and even in the dim light, I could see dirt or maybe dried blood caked on his cheeks and neck. "Truck won't start," he said, and his voice sounded like gravel being crushed. "Need a ride to the next town." Something deep in my brain, some primitive survival instinct, was screaming at me to get back in my truck and drive. This wasn't right. This man wasn't right. "Sorry, man. Company policy, can't take passengers." I started backing up. "I can call someone for you when I get to the next town with service." That's when he smiled, and I swear to God, his teeth looked too sharp, too numerous for a human mouth. "It's cold out here, friend. Real cold." He took a step toward me. "Just need a little help." I turned and walked quickly back to my truck, not running, but damn near close. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely get the key in the door. As I climbed into the cab, I glanced back. He was following me, walking with a strange, uneven gait, almost like a marionette being pulled along by invisible strings, and he was moving fast, too fast for someone just walking. I slammed the door, locked it, and fired up the engine. Through my side mirror, I saw him break into a run. "Fuck this," I muttered, and pulled back onto the highway. In my rear view, I saw him reach the spot where I'd been parked. He just stood there, watching my taillights disappear. I kept checking my mirrors for the next 20 miles, half expecting to see those flickering headlights behind me again. About an hour later, I pulled into the Flying J truck stop outside of Roundup. My hands were still shaking as I parked. I needed coffee, food, and maybe to talk to another human being who wasn't whatever the hell that was. The truck stop was nearly empty, just a couple of long haulers getting fuel and a few trucks parked for the night. Inside, the fluorescent lights made everything look harsh and too bright after the darkness of the highway. The place smelled like burnt coffee and grease, normally comforting truck stop smells, but tonight they just made my stomach turn. I grabbed a coffee and sat at the counter. The only other people in the diner section were 2 older truckers in a booth talking quietly. The waitress, a woman in her 50s with dyed red hair, came over. "Rough night, honey?" she asked, eyeing my still trembling hands. "Yeah," I said. "Ran into something weird on 87. The 2 truckers in the booth went quiet. One of them, a big guy with a gray beard, turned to look at me. "What kind of weird?" he asked. I hesitated, then figured what the hell. Guy with a broken down pickup, something not right about him, followed me when I tried to leave. The truckers exchanged a look. The bearded one stood up and walked over to me, coffee mug in hand. "This pickup," he said quietly. "Older model? Rusty?" My blood went cold. "Yeah," he nodded slowly. "And the fella, tall, skinny, looks like death warmed over. You've seen him too?" I asked, relief washing over me. I wasn't going crazy. "We call him the ghost of Highway 87, the other trucker said, joining us. He was smaller, with a weathered face that had seen too many miles. He shows up about this time every year, always looking for help, always trying to get in someone's truck." What is he?" I asked, my mouth suddenly dry. The bearded trucker shrugged. "Don't know for sure. Story goes, he was a driver who got killed out there maybe 30, 40 years back, hit and run. By the time someone found him, he'd been out there for days." "That's bullshit," I said automatically, but my voice lacked conviction. "Maybe," the smaller trucker said, "but here's what I know for sure. 3 years ago, my buddy Dave stopped to help someone matching that description. Never made his delivery. They found his truck abandoned on 87, engine running, drivers, door open. Never found Dave." I felt sick. "So what happens if he gets in your truck?" Neither of them answered right away. Finally, the bearded one spoke. "Nobody knows, because nobody who gives him a ride ever tells the tale." I finished my coffee in silence, trying to convince myself they were just messing with me. Truckers love to scare the shit out of each other with road stories, but the look in their eyes told me this wasn't a joke. I thanked them for the warning and headed back to my truck. The night had gotten colder and a light drizzle was falling. I climbed into the cab, locked the doors, and sat there for a minute, trying to calm my nerves. That's when I heard it. A light tapping on my passenger window. I froze, afraid to look. The tapping came again, more insistent. Slowly, I turned my head. He was standing there, that same hollow-eyed man, rain running down his gray face. Up close, I could see his skin wasn't just pale. It had a translucent quality, like I could almost see through it to something dark underneath. Water wasn't soaking into his clothes, but seemed to pass right through them. "Need a ride, friend," he said, his voice somehow audible through the glass. "It's cold out here, so cold." I started the engine with shaking hands. He smiled that too wide smile and tapped the glass again, harder this time. The window seemed to frost over where his fingers touched it. "Just open the door," he said. "I've been waiting so long for someone to help me." I threw the truck into gear and peeled out of the parking lot, tires squealing. In my mirror, I saw him standing there watching me go, not running this time, just watching. I drove non-stop for almost 2 hours, pushing well over the speed limit, before I felt safe enough to pull over at another truck stop, this one in Billings. I was exhausted, scared, and starting to doubt my own sanity. The diner there was busier, a small Mercy. I took a booth in the corner where I could watch the door and ordered food I couldn't eat. Every time the door opened, I tensed up, expecting to see him. After picking at my food for 20 minutes, I used the restroom and headed back to my truck. I needed sleep desperately, but the thought of closing my eyes terrified me. I climbed into the sleeper cab, leaving all the interior lights on, and lay down fully clothed. Despite my fear, exhaustion won out, and I drifted into an uneasy sleep. The tapping woke me up. Tap, tap, tap. On the small window of the sleeper cab, my eyes shot open. It was still dark outside. The digital clock on my dash read 3:17 a.m. Tap, tap, tap. I lay perfectly still, barely breathing. "I know you're in there, friend," that gravelly voice, somehow inside my cab now. "I just need a little help. Won't you help me?" I bolted upright and looked out the window. There he was, face pressed against the glass, those hollow eyes staring right at me. His mouth was moving, forming words I could hear as if he were whispering directly into my ear. "So many have helped me before. Their help keeps me going. Just let me in." I scrambled into the driver's seat and started the engine. As I pulled away, I looked back and saw him standing in the parking lot watching me go, not chasing, just watching. Patient, like he had all the time in the world. For the next 6 hours I drove. I didn't stop for anything. I delivered my load in Billings and immediately picked up another one heading west. Anything to get away from Highway 87, but he found me again, and again, and again. That night, at a rest stop in Idaho, tapping on my window. The next morning at a diner in Wyoming, standing in the parking lot, watching me. 3 days later in Colorado, I saw him in my mirror, driving that rusty pickup right behind me, those flickering headlights burning into my retinas. I've talked to other truckers about him now. They all know the stories. Some have seen him themselves. They say he's the ghost of a trucker named William Cobb who died on Highway 87 in 1976, left behind in a snowstorm by another driver who'd promised him help. They say he's been wandering that highway ever since, looking for a ride. And those who give him one, they join him somehow, become part of whatever he is. Their rigs are found abandoned. Their bodies are never recovered. I don't know why he's fixated on me, why he follows me across state lines when others say he never leaves that stretch of Highway 87. Maybe it's because I stopped. I acknowledged him. I made eye contact. It's been 6 months now. I've changed jobs, changed routes. I haven't been back to Montana. I've tried everything. Prayers, protective charms, even a paranormal investigator who gave me some kind of blessed salt to line my truck with. Nothing works. He's always there, just at the edge of my vision, standing on the shoulder as I drive by, watching from the tree line at rest stops, tapping on my window in the dead of night, always with the same request, just let me in, I need a little help. I don't know how much longer I can do this, how much longer I can keep running. Sometimes I think about just opening the door, just to make it stop, just to see what happens. But then I remember those hollow eyes, that too wide smile, and I keep driving. If you're ever on Highway 87 in Montana and you see a broken down pickup with flickering headlights, don't stop, don't make eye contact, don't acknowledge it at all. Just drive. Drive as fast and as far as you can, because once he notices you, he never stops watching, and sooner or later, we all need to sleep. Story 13. I'll never forget that night on Devil's Pass. 30 years behind the wheel, and nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared me for what happened. Been driving big rigs since I was 23, and I've seen just about everything the road can throw at you. Blizzards in the Rockies, flash floods in Arizona, even had a bear run out in front of me once in Montana. But what happened last winter? That's why I'm writing this. Maybe someone else has seen it too. Maybe I'm not crazy. It was a Thursday in late January. I was sitting in the truck stop outside Denver, planning to head home for the weekend, when my dispatcher called. "Frank, I know you're headed home, but I've got an emergency haul. Steel beams needed in Salt Lake by morning. The guy who was supposed to take it called in sick, and the customer's offering triple rate." Triple rate. That kind of money doesn't come along often, especially for us independent operators. My mortgage payment was due, and my grandson's birthday was coming up. I wanted to get him one of those fancy gaming systems. "What's the catch?" I asked. There's always a catch. "It's Devil's Pass. Weather report shows snow coming in around midnight." Devil's Pass. Every trucker knows it. That winding mountain route that connects Colorado to Utah through some of the nastiest terrain in the Rockies. Narrow lanes, sharp curves, steep drops with guardrails that wouldn't stop a bicycle, let alone an 80,000-pound rig. And in winter, most companies won't even send their trucks that way. "Triple rate, you say?" I heard myself answering. 2 hours later, I was fueled up and heading out. My rig was in good shape. 2018, Peterbilt, well-maintained. I had chains in the side compartment, extra diesel fuel, emergency rations, the works. 30 years teaches you to be prepared. The first couple hours were fine. Clear skies, stars out, roads dry. I hit the base of Devil's Pass around 10 that night. The road narrows there, starts its winding climb up the mountain. signs everywhere warning about the grade, the curves, the danger. I'd driven it maybe a dozen times over the years, always in daylight, always in good weather. Never at night, never with snow in the forecast. My CB radio crackled occasionally with chatter from other drivers, most of them miles away on the interstate. Not many take this route, especially at night. I called out a few times, checking road conditions ahead. No answers. About 30 minutes into the pass, the first snowflakes started falling. Nothing major, just a light dusting that sparkled in my headlights. The temperature gauge on my dashboard showed 27 degrees, cold enough for ice. I slowed down, taking the curves even more carefully. The road was getting slicker, and the drop-offs to my right seemed to get steeper with every mile. In some places, there's nothing between you and a 1,000-foot plunge except a thin metal rail that's probably been there since the 70s. It was around 11:30 when I noticed the headlights behind me. At first, I was almost relieved. Another vehicle meant I wasn't completely alone up here. The lights appeared suddenly, rounding a curve maybe a quarter-mile back. They were closing fast. Too fast for these conditions. Had to be a local, someone who knew these roads better than me, or someone stupid or drunk. I tapped my brakes, thinking maybe they didn't realize there was a semi ahead. The truck kept coming, closing the gap between us in seconds. Now the headlights filled my mirrors, bright and unrelenting. I couldn't see what kind of vehicle it was, just those damn lights, old-fashioned yellowy ones, not the LED headlights most newer vehicles have. "Hey there, you're riding my bumper pretty hard," I called out on the CB. "Road's getting slick. Might want to back off a bit." No response. The snow was coming down harder now, big fat flakes that reduced visibility to maybe 100 feet. I was doing about 35, which was still too fast for my comfort, but I didn't want whatever was behind me to rear-end me on one of these curves. I found a slightly wider section of road and edged over as far as I dared, hoping they'd pass. They didn't. Just stayed right on my tail, so close I couldn't even see their headlights anymore in my mirrors, just the glow illuminating my trailer. "Come on, buddy," I muttered. "Just pass already." As if hearing me, the vehicle behind finally started to move into the left lane. I slowed even more to give them room. Through my side mirror, I caught my first glimpse of it. An old truck, looked like maybe a late 70s or early 80s model. Couldn't make out the exact make in the dark, but it was a semi like mine, pulling a box trailer. The weird thing was how it looked. Even in that brief glance, I could see it was in rough shape, rusted in patches, paint faded where it wasn't rusted, like it had been sitting in a junkyard for decades. I squinted, trying to see the driver as it pulled alongside, but the cab was dark, too dark. The snow swirled between us, but I should have been able to see something, the glow from the dashboard, a silhouette, anything. "Hey there," I called again on the CB. "You're moving pretty fast for these conditions. Everything okay over there?" Nothing but static in response. The old truck kept pace with mine for what felt like forever, but was probably only 30 seconds. I kept glancing over, trying to see the driver. That's when I noticed there wasn't one. The cab was empty. I'm not ashamed to say my heart nearly stopped. I've never believed in ghosts or any of that supernatural crap, but what I was seeing, it wasn't possible. A truck doesn't drive itself, especially not on a road like Devil's Pass. Maybe the driver was slumped down, I told myself. Maybe they were having a medical emergency and had fallen below my line of sight. I slowed down more, hoping to get a better look. The truck slowed with me, staying perfectly aligned with my cab. Now I could see it better. It was definitely ancient, rusted through in places, with faded lettering on the door I couldn't quite make out. The windows were intact, but so dirty they were nearly opaque. And still, no driver that I could see. My hands were sweating despite the cold. I gripped, the wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. "What do you want?" I shouted, even though I knew they couldn't hear me. As if in answer, the truck suddenly accelerated, pulling ahead of me. Its taillights were dim, one of them out completely. I watched as it gained distance, taking the curves ahead at a speed that made no sense in these conditions. No driver, human or otherwise, should have been able to navigate Devil's Pass that fast in a snowstorm. Then it happened. The truck approached a particularly sharp curve, one with a sheer drop-off on the outside edge. Instead of following the road, the truck just drove straight off the edge, into the darkness beyond. I hit my brakes, skidding slightly before coming to a stop. Had I just witnessed a suicide? An accident? I sat there, engine idling, staring at the spot where the truck had vanished. After a minute, I carefully pulled forward until I reached the curve. I stopped again, put on my hazards, and grabbed my flashlight from the glove compartment. I wasn't thinking straight. I should have just called for help on the CB, but I felt like I needed to see for myself. I climbed down from my cab, the cold hitting me like a physical blow. The snow was falling heavily now, already accumulating on my shoulders as I walked to the edge of the road. I shined my flashlight down the steep embankment, expecting to see the twisted wreckage of the truck. There was nothing. No truck, no skid marks leading over the edge, no broken guardrail. Just an untouched blanket of snow covering the mountainside. I stood there for what felt like minutes, my breath forming clouds in the beam of my flashlight. I walked up and down the edge a bit, thinking maybe I had the wrong spot, but no. This was definitely where I'd seen the truck go over. The only evidence of anything unusual was a set of tire tracks in the fresh snow, tracks that approached the curve and then simply vanished, as if the truck had lifted off into the air rather than plunging down the mountainside. I got back in my truck, hands shaking so badly I could barely turn the key. I tried the CB again. Anyone out there? Anyone on Devil's Pass tonight? Just static. I drove the rest of the way through the pass in a daze, going so slow that the trip took almost twice as long as it should have. Every shadow, every curve seemed to hide something waiting for me, but I didn't see the truck again. Around 2 in the morning, I finally reached the truck stop on the Utah side of the pass. I pulled in, legs like jelly when I climbed down from the cab. I needed coffee, needed to be around normal people, needed to convince myself I hadn't completely lost my mind. The truck stop was nearly empty, just a couple of local drivers sitting at the counter, nursing cups of coffee and shooting the breeze with the night waitress. I sat down at the far end, ordered the strongest coffee they had, and tried to stop my hands from shaking. I must have looked pretty rough because the waitress asked if I was okay. "Just came through the pass," I said. "Bad weather up there." One of the other drivers looked over at me. Old-timer, probably been driving these routes since before I was born. Devil's Pass in a snowstorm? You're either brave or crazy? Probably both, I admitted. Saw something strange up there too. I don't know why I mentioned it. Maybe I needed to hear someone tell me I was just tired, that my eyes had played tricks on me. The old driver exchanged glances with his buddy. What kind of strange? I hesitated, then figured what the hell. An old truck, really old, all rusted out, drove right off the edge at Henderson Curve. When I stopped to look, there was nothing there. No truck, no crash, nothing. The diner got real quiet. The waitress had stopped wiping down the counter, and both drivers were staring at me now. "What?" I asked. The old-timer sighed. "You saw Wilson." "Wilson?" He nodded. "Back in '86, there was this driver named of Wilson. Regular on this route, knew the pass better than anyone. One night, middle of a snowstorm, his truck went off at Henderson Curve. They found the truck the next day, smashed to hell at the bottom of the ravine. Never found Wilson, though. His friend jumped in. Search and rescue looked for days. No body, not even blood in the cab. Like he just vanished. That's not the weird part," the old-timer continued. "They checked the logbooks, the cargo. Wilson was hauling steel that night. Same as the load that was supposed to go out the day before but got delayed because of weather." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the snow melting off my coat. "What are you saying?" "Local legend says Wilson's still out there trying to finish his last haul. Some drivers claim they've seen him on the pass, always in bad weather, always at night, always hauling steel." I stared at him. "You're messing with me." He shrugged. "Believe what you want. but I've been driving these mountains for 40 years and I've never taken a steel load through Devil's Pass at night, not once. I didn't sleep much that night, delivered my load the next morning and deadheaded back to Denver, taking the long way around. I've been driving other routes since then. My dispatcher thinks I'm crazy, turning down good-paying jobs just because they involve Devil's Pass. Maybe I am crazy. Maybe what I saw was just exhaustion, or a trick of the light, or some local pulling a prank. But I know what I saw, and I know that some roads, once they take a life, never truly let go. I still drive for a living, still love it most days, but I'll never drive Devil's Pass again, especially not at night, especially not hauling steel. Story 14. I've been driving 18-wheelers for almost 23 years now. I've seen pretty much everything the road can throw at you. Wild animals darting across highways, drunk drivers going the wrong way, even a tornado that nearly lifted my rig off the pavement outside of Omaha. But what happened to me last winter on the stretch between Denver and Salt Lake City, I still can't explain it. I still check maps sometimes, looking for a place I know isn't there. It was the second week of January, and I was hauling a load of medical supplies that needed to get to Salt Lake by morning. Important stuff, the kind of delivery you don't delay if you can help it. The weather report had mentioned a storm system moving in, but dispatch assured me I could beat it if I left early enough. They were wrong. About 3 hours into the drive, I hit the worst blizzard I've seen in all my years on the road. The wind was howling like something alive, and the snow was coming down so thick I could barely see past my hood ornament. I was creeping along at maybe 20 miles per hour, white-knuckling the steering wheel, when my defroster started acting up. The windshield was icing over faster than the system could melt it. I knew I needed to pull over before I ended up in a ditch, or worse, taking someone else with me. Just as I was thinking I might have to just stop on the shoulder and wait it out, I spotted a blue highway sign for a rest area. Crescent Ridge Rest Stop, next exit. I'd driven this route dozens of times before and couldn't remember a rest stop there, but I figured maybe it was new, or maybe I just hadn't needed to stop there before. When you drive the same stretches year after year, they start to blur together. I took the exit, relieved to find a place to wait out the storm. The road curved through some trees before opening onto a small parking lot with a single-story building. Right away, something felt off. The parking lot hadn't been plowed, and there were no other vehicles. Strange for a rest stop during a storm like this. The building itself looked old and poorly maintained, with flickering exterior lights and a sagging roof heavy with snow. I pulled my rig into a spot near the entrance, noticing how the wind seemed to be whistling strangely around the building. I grabbed my thermos and phone, which had no signal naturally, and made a dash for the door. The inside was even worse than the outside. The fluorescent lights were buzzing and blinking, and the place had that unmistakable musty smell of a building that hasn't been properly maintained in years. The tile floor was cracked and dingy, and the few chairs and tables looked like they belonged in the 1970s, all orange plastic and metal legs. What struck me immediately was how cold it was inside, barely warmer than outside. The heating system was either broken or turned off. I walked over to the vending machines thinking maybe I could at least get a candy bar or something, but they were all empty. Not just sold out, completely empty, with no product displays or price listings. I called out, "Hello, anybody working here?" My voice echoed back at me. No response. I noticed a rack of tourist brochures and walked over to check them out. Maybe there'd be a map that could tell me exactly where I was. What I found instead sent a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. The newest brochure I could find was dated 1993. The rest were older, some from the 80s, even a few from the 70s. I picked up a faded pamphlet about Yellowstone, and a thick layer of dust came away on my fingers. These hadn't been touched in years. That's when I heard it. A soft whisper coming from the hallway that led to the restrooms. It wasn't distinct enough to make out words, just a hushed sound like someone talking very quietly to themselves. I told myself it was just the wind finding its way through the building's poor insulation, but it didn't sound like wind. It sounded like a voice. "Hello?" I called again, louder this time. "Building maintenance? Anybody?" The whispering stopped immediately. I should have left right then. Every instinct was telling me to get back in my truck and take my chances with the storm, but I really needed to use the bathroom, and I figured I was just spooking myself. Old buildings make weird noises, especially in storms. I headed down the hallway toward the men's room, my boots squeaking on the grimy floor. The bathroom door creaked as I pushed it open. Inside, it was even worse than the main area. 2 of the 4 stalls had doors hanging off the hinges. The mirrors above the sinks were spotted with black mold, and one of the fluorescent lights was flickering so badly it was practically a strobe light. I used the urinal quickly, then went to wash my hands. As I was rinsing the soap off, I glanced up at the mirror and froze. For just a split second, I swear I saw someone standing behind me, a tall, thin figure just at the edge of my peripheral vision. I spun around, my heart hammering in my chest, but there was nobody there. "Get it together, Frank," I muttered to myself, drying my hands on my jeans since the paper towel dispenser was empty. "This place is just giving you the creeps." I hurried back to the main area, telling myself I'd just grab my thermos and head back to the truck. The storm couldn't be worse than this place. That's when I saw him. Standing by the vending machines was a man. At least, I think it was a man. He was impossibly tall and thin, wearing what looked like an old, weathered coat that hung off his frame like it was on a coat hanger. His face, I couldn't quite focus on his face. It was like trying to look at something underwater, distorted and shifting. We stood there for what felt like minutes but was probably only seconds, staring at each other across the empty rest stop. Then, slowly, he raised one long, bony arm and pointed toward the exit door. I didn't need to be told twice. I left my thermos where it was and backed toward the door, never taking my eyes off him. He didn't move, just kept pointing, his arm impossibly steady. The moment I pushed through the door into the howling storm, I felt a wave of relief so intense it made me dizzy. I half ran, half slid through the snow to my truck, fumbling with my keys with shaking hands. As I climbed up into the cab, I looked back at the rest stop. What I saw then makes me question my sanity to this day. Standing around the building, barely visible through the swirling snow, were dozens of figures, all tall and thin like the one inside, all wearing those same weathered coats. They were spaced evenly around the perimeter of the building, facing outward like sentinels, or prison guards. I cranked the engine and flipped on my high beams. The figures didn't move or react to the light, but now I could see them more clearly, and I wish to God I couldn't. Their faces weren't faces at all, just smooth, pale surfaces with subtle indentations where features should be. Like someone had taken a human face and erased all the details. I threw the truck into gear and peeled out of that parking lot so fast I'm surprised I didn't jackknife on the ice. In my rearview mirror, I could see them all turning in unison to watch me leave, their blank faces following my retreat. I drove white-knuckled through that storm for another 2 hours, not daring to stop again until I reached a well-lit, busy truck stop just outside of Salt Lake City. I was still shaking when I pulled in, my shirt soaked with sweat despite the cold. Inside the truck stop, I asked the cashier about Crescent Ridge Rest Stop. She looked at me like I was speaking another language, said she'd lived in the area her whole life and never heard of it. I asked a couple of other truckers too, guys who'd been driving that route for decades. Nobody had ever heard of it. When I finally got to my delivery point the next morning, I used their computer to look it up. Nothing. No Crescent Ridge Rest Stop on any map. No record of it ever existing. I even called the Department of Transportation later that week. According to their records, there is no rest stop at that location, and hasn't been one planned or demolished either. But I know what I saw. I know where I stopped. And sometimes when I'm driving at night and pass a rest stop with just a few cars in the lot, I wonder if the people inside are really people at all. I wonder if they'll ever make it back to the road, or if they're still there, trapped somehow. I've taken a different route between Denver and Salt Lake City ever since. It adds about 100 miles to my trip, but I don't care. Nothing could make me drive that stretch of highway again. Because the thing that keeps me up at night isn't the impossibility of a rest stop that doesn't exist, or even those faceless figures standing in the snow. It's the certainty that if I ever see that blue sign again, Crescent Ridge Rest Stop, next exit, it won't be by accident. They'll be waiting for me to return, and this time, they won't be pointing toward the door. Story 15. I've never been a big believer in the paranormal. Ghost stories, haunted houses, all that stuff. I always thought it was just people letting their imagination run wild. But after what happened to me last month during my night shift at Memorial Hospital, I'm not so sure anymore. I keep replaying it in my head, trying to make sense of it, but I can't. Maybe writing it down will help. I had only been working security at the hospital for about 3 weeks. The job seemed perfect, decent pay, mostly quiet nights, and best of all, I could study for my online classes during downtime. The hospital wasn't exactly new, probably built in the 70s or 80s, with that typical institutional feel. You know, those long corridors with the squeaky linoleum floors and flickering fluorescent lights. The night it happened, I arrived for my shift at 10 in the evening like usual. The day guard, Mike, was in a hurry to leave and barely briefed me before heading out. "All quiet, nothing to report," he mumbled while grabbing his jacket. He did mention that the East Wing was still off limits due to renovations, but that was nothing new. That section had been closed off since before I started. I settled into my spot at the security desk, a small station near the main entrance with 6 monitors showing feeds from different parts of the hospital. My job was simple: watch the monitors, do hourly walkthroughs, and make sure nobody went where they weren't supposed to go. I had my thermos of coffee, my textbook open on the desk, and was prepared for another uneventful night. For the first couple of hours, everything was normal. The hospital gets pretty quiet after visiting hours end. Just the occasional nurse walking down a hallway or an orderly pushing a cart. Around midnight, I was in the middle of reading a chapter for my psychology class when I noticed the lights on monitor 3 flickering. It wasn't unusual for lights to flicker in old buildings, but something about it caught my attention. The monitor showed the corridor leading toward the East Wing, the renovated area. I watched as the lights flickered rapidly, creating an almost strobe-like effect before stabilizing again. Just as I was about to look away, I saw something move at the edge of the screen. I leaned in closer, squinting at the grainy footage. There, at the far end of the corridor, where it connects to the East Wing, was what looked like a figure. It was hard to make out clearly, just a dark silhouette standing motionless. I figured it was probably a doctor or nurse who had wandered too close to the restricted area, so I grabbed my walkie-talkie to call it in. "This is Alex at the front desk. I've got someone near the East Wing entrance on camera 3. Anyone working in that area?" I waited for a response, but all I got was static. I tried again, this time on all channels. Nothing but crackling noise. I glanced back at the monitor. The figure was still there, but now it seemed different somehow. It wasn't moving, but it felt like it was staring directly at the camera. A chill ran down my spine, but I shook it off. Probably just my imagination getting the better of me after reading too many psychology chapters on suggestion and perception. Hospital protocol said I needed to investigate any unauthorized persons in restricted areas. Normally, I would have called for backup, but with my walkie-talkie not working, I didn't have much choice. I grabbed my flashlight and headed out. The hospital feels completely different at night. During the day, it's busy, bright, filled with sounds of people talking and machines beeping. But at night, it transforms. The corridors stretch out like long, empty tunnels. Your footsteps echo off the walls. Every little noise seems amplified. As I walked toward the East Wing, I kept trying my walkie-talkie, hoping to get through to someone. Still nothing but static. The fluorescent lights above me buzzed and flickered, casting weird shadows on the floor. I tried to tell myself it was just old wiring, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease growing in my stomach. The closer I got to the east wing, the colder it seemed to get. I could see my breath fogging in front of me, which made no sense because the hospital usually keeps a consistent temperature. I pulled my jacket tighter around me and kept walking. When I reached the corridor I'd seen on the monitor, I stopped and looked around. There was no one there, just an empty hallway ending at a set of double doors with restricted area, no entry signs plastered across them. The renovation had been going on for months, supposedly to modernize the oldest part of the hospital. I was about to turn back when I heard footsteps behind me. I spun around quickly, my heart suddenly pounding. "Hello? Anyone there?" My voice sounded smaller than I expected, like it was being swallowed up by the emptiness around me. "No," one answered, but I could have sworn I heard the footsteps again, fainter this time, moving away from me. I followed the sound, turning a corner into another corridor. Still no one. But now I heard what sounded like a door closing somewhere ahead of me. Against my better judgment, I kept going. The logical part of my brain was screaming at me to turn around, to go back to my desk and call for actual backup. But something pushed me forward. Curiosity, stubbornness, I don't know. I found myself in a part of the hospital I wasn't familiar with. The signs on the wall indicated I was nearing the east wing, which didn't make sense. I thought I had been heading away from it. The lights were dimmer here, some of them completely out, forcing me to use my flashlight. That's when I noticed one of the doors along the corridor was slightly ajar. It shouldn't have been. This entire section was supposed to be sealed off for renovation. The door had a faded number, 237. I approached it slowly, my flashlight beam shaking slightly because my hand had started to tremble. "Hello, security here. This area is restricted," I called out, trying to sound authoritative despite the fear creeping through me. No response. I pushed the door open wider with my foot and shone my flashlight inside. It was an old patient room, dusty and clearly unused for some time. The bed was stripped and there were plastic sheets covering some of the furniture. Renovation equipment was stacked in one corner, paint cans, rolls of wallpaper, that sort of thing. And in the opposite corner there was a figure crouched with its back to me. My throat went dry. "Excuse me," I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. "You can't be in here. This area is closed." The figure didn't respond at first. Then, slowly, it began to stand. But there was something wrong about the movement. Jerky, unnatural, like watching a film with frames missing. It rose higher than it should have, taller than any person I'd ever seen. Stood frozen, unable to move as the figure turned. I couldn't see a face, just darkness where features should have been. My flashlight beam seemed to pass right through it, illuminating the wall behind. "What the?" I started to say, but before I could finish, the figure did something impossible. It moved backward into the wall and disappeared, just phased right through the solid surface like it wasn't even there. I stood there in shock for maybe 2 seconds before the door behind me slammed shut with a bang that nearly stopped my heart. I whirled around and grabbed the handle, but it wouldn't turn. I was locked in. "Help!" I shouted, pounding on the door. "Somebody help!" My flashlight flickered once, twice, and then went dead, plunging me into complete darkness. The kind of darkness that feels thick, tangible, like you could reach out and touch it. I fumbled with my flashlight, shaking it, hitting it against my palm, but it was no use. In the pitch blackness, I became acutely aware of the sound of my own panicked breathing, and then of another sound. Breathing that wasn't mine. It was coming from right behind me. I froze, not daring to move. The breathing was slow, deliberate, like someone savoring the moment. Then came a whisper, so close to my ear I could feel cold breath on my neck. "You shouldn't have come." Something ice cold brushed against the back of my neck and I screamed. Pure terror gave me strength I didn't know I had. I hurled myself at the door, slamming into it with my shoulder once, twice, 3 times, until finally the lock gave way and I tumbled out into the corridor. I didn't look back. I ran like I've never run before, my feet barely touching the ground as I sprinted through the hospital. I didn't stop at corners, didn't slow down when I nearly collided with a startled nurse. I just ran until I burst through the main entrance doors into the parking lot, the cold night air hitting my lungs like a shock. I stood there gasping, bent over with my hands on my knees, trying to catch my breath. My whole body was shaking. I looked back at the hospital, half expecting to see that figure following me, but there was nothing. Eventually, I managed to pull myself together enough to go back inside. I had to. I couldn't just abandon my post. But I stayed at the security desk for the rest of my shift, my eyes glued to the monitors, especially the one showing the corridor to the east wing. I saw nothing unusual for the remainder of the night, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. When my replacement arrived in the morning, I tried to tell him what happened, but the words sounded ridiculous, even to my own ears. He clearly thought I was messing with him or that I'd fallen asleep and had a nightmare. I called in sick the next day and the day after that. When I finally went back, I requested to be moved to the day shift. My supervisor wasn't happy about it, but he agreed after seeing how shaken I still was. I did some digging in the hospital's history, trying to find anything about room 237 or the East Wing. All I could find were vague references to a tragic incident in the 80s and the wing being closed for a while before reopening. Nothing specific, nothing that would explain what I saw. I still work at the hospital, but only during daylight hours. Sometimes when I walk past the corridor leading to the East Wing, I feel a cold spot, like walking through a pocket of winter in the middle of a heated building. And sometimes, just at the edge of my hearing, I think I can make out a whisper, "You shouldn't have come." I don't know what was in that room. I don't know if it was a ghost, a hallucination, or something else entirely. All I know is that I'm never going back there at night, and I'm never going into the East Wing alone. Some things are better left undisturbed, and whatever lives in room 237 is definitely one of them. Story 16. I've never told this story to anyone other than my therapist. Even after 3 years, I still get goosebumps thinking about what happened that night on Highway 20. I'm only sharing this now because I need to know if anyone else has experienced something similar. It was late October 2019. I was driving from Portland to visit my cousin in Bozeman, Montana. I'd made this drive at least a dozen times before and always took the scenic route through the mountains instead of the interstate. The views are spectacular during the day, and there's barely any traffic compared to I-84. That day, I got a late start. I'd planned to leave around noon, but my car needed an unexpected oil change, and by the time I finally hit the road, it was already past 4 in the afternoon. No big deal, I thought. I'd done plenty of night driving before, and my plan was to stop at a motel in Idaho Falls before continuing on the next day. The first few hours were normal. The sunset painted the mountains in shades of orange and purple as I drove east, and I remember thinking how peaceful it was. I had my playlist going, some snacks, and a thermos of coffee. Perfect road trip conditions. Around 8:30, I entered a stretch of highway that cuts through a dense national forest. The road narrowed to 2 lanes, and the trees pressed in from both sides. This part always gets dark quickly after sunset, but I wasn't concerned. I knew the route well, or at least I thought I did. By 9:30, I realized something was off. My phone had lost service about an hour back, which wasn't unusual in the mountains, but my GPS was acting strange. The screen kept freezing on the same section of road, as if I wasn't moving at all. I rebooted it twice, but it made no difference. I figured it was just a glitch and kept driving. The highway stretched ahead, illuminated only by my headlights. No street lamps, no other cars, nothing but pitch darkness, beyond the reach of my lights. I hadn't seen another vehicle in over an hour, which struck me as odd even for this remote route. By 11, I started getting anxious. According to my calculations, I should have reached a small town by now, or at least seen some sign of civilization. But there was nothing, just endless forest and asphalt. My gas gauge was dipping below half a tank, and I began to wonder if I had somehow missed a turn. Just when I was considering turning around, my headlights caught a reflective road sign. Briar Ridge, 5 miles. I felt a surge of relief. I didn't specifically remember a town called Briar Ridge from my previous trips, but it had to have a gas station, or at least somewhere I could stop and figure out where I was. I pressed on, watching the odometer tick up 5 miles, then 10, then 15. No town materialized, no lights in the distance, no buildings, nothing. Just the same dark road cutting through the same dense forest. The clock on my dashboard read 12:06 a.m. when it happened. My headlights flickered for a split second, just long enough to make my heart skip, then stabilized again. And that's when I saw her. Standing in the middle of my lane was a woman. She had her back to me, wearing what looked like a long, tattered dress that might have been white once but now appeared gray and dirty in my headlights. Her hair was long and dark, hanging limply down her back. I slammed on the brakes, coming to a stop about 20 feet from her. My hands were shaking as I honked the horn, but she didn't move, didn't even flinch. "What the hell?" I whispered to myself. I rolled down my window a crack and called out, "Hello? Are you okay? Do you need help?" Nothing. She remained perfectly still, as if she hadn't heard me at all. My instincts were screaming at me to turn around and drive in the opposite direction, but something kept me frozen in place. Maybe it was the thought that this person might genuinely need help, or maybe it was the bizarre nature of finding someone standing motionless on a pitch-black highway in the middle of nowhere. After what felt like forever but was probably only a minute, I carefully put my car in drive and slowly steered around her, keeping as much distance as possible. As I passed, I glanced in her direction, but she never turned to face me. I caught a glimpse of the fabric of her dress. It looked oddly old-fashioned, like something from a historical photo. Once I was past her, I accelerated, my heart pounding in my chest. I kept checking my rear-view mirror, but she disappeared from view almost immediately in the darkness behind me. "Okay, that was weird," I said to myself, trying to calm down. "Maybe she's from a nearby property. Maybe she's lost or confused." But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. People don't just stand in the middle of highways at midnight, especially not in such isolated areas. I drove for another 10 minutes, my nerves still on edge, when my headlights illuminated another road sign. My blood went cold. Briar Ridge, 5 miles. I blinked hard, certain I was seeing things. It was the exact same sign I'd passed earlier. That was impossible. I'd been driving straight the entire time, never turning around, never taking any exits. "No way," I muttered, slowing down. "No fucking way." I considered stopping to check my map, but the thought of being stationary on this dark road suddenly terrified me. Instead, I pressed on, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. 5 more miles passed, then 10, then 15. Still no town, no lights, no civilization. Just endless forest and that same stretch of highway that somehow seemed to be looping back on itself. And then my headlights flickered again. When they steadied, there she was, the same woman in the same position, standing in the middle of my lane with her back to me. A cold sweat broke out all over my body. This wasn't possible. I'd been driving straight for at least 20 minutes. There was no way this could be the same person. And yet somehow, I knew it was. This time I didn't stop. I slowed down just enough to steer around her safely, my eyes fixed on her motionless form as I passed. Just like before, she never acknowledged my presence, never turned to look at my car. As soon as I was past her, I floored it. The speedometer climbed to 70, 80, 90 miles per hour. I didn't care if I got a ticket. I just wanted to get away from whatever this was. The fuel gauge was now approaching empty. My phone still had no signal. The GPS screen remained frozen. I had no idea where I was or how to get back to any road I recognized. And then my engine started to sputter. "No, no, no," I pleaded, watching the fuel gauge drop to the red zone. "Not now. Please, not now." The car limped forward for another mile before dying completely. I coasted to the shoulder and came to a stop, surrounded by absolute darkness. I sat there, frozen, for what felt like hours. Every few minutes I'd try to restart the engine, but it was useless. I was out of gas. I tried my phone again. No signal. I flashed my headlights repeatedly, hoping someone might see them, but the battery would die soon if I kept that up. Eventually, exhaustion overcame fear. I reclined my seat slightly, locked all the doors, and closed my eyes, telling myself I'd just rest until dawn, when I could figure out what to do. I must have fallen asleep, because the next thing I knew I was jerking awake, disoriented and cold. I glanced at the dashboard clock. 12:06 a.m. That couldn't be right. I'd been driving for hours after midnight, and then sitting in my dead car for at least another hour or two. It should be close to dawn. I rubbed my eyes, thinking the clock must be broken. And that's when I saw her. She was standing outside my passenger window. Her face was inches from the glass, pale and gaunt with dark, sunken eyes. Her lips were moving, but I couldn't hear any sound. The dress I'd glimpsed earlier was even more tattered up close, burned at the edges, I realized with growing horror. I screamed and scrambled away, pressing myself against the driver's side door. She didn't react to my scream. She just kept mouthing words I couldn't understand, her expression urgent but vacant at the same time. Then she raised her hand and placed it flat against the window. Her palm left a sooty print on the glass. The instant her hand touched my car, the engine roared to life. The fuel gauge jumped from empty to full. The headlights blazed on, brighter than before. I didn't hesitate. I slammed the car into drive and floored it, tires spinning on the asphalt before catching traction. I didn't look back. I didn't look at my mirrors. I just drove as fast as I could, praying I wouldn't see another Briar Ridge sign. After about 30 minutes of white-knuckle driving, the forest finally began to thin out. I spotted lights in the distance, a gas station, glowing like a beacon of salvation. I pulled in, shaking uncontrollably, and sat there for several minutes before I could bring myself to get out. The attendant was an older man who looked concerned when he saw my face. "You okay, miss? You look like you've seen a ghost." I almost laughed hysterically at his choice of words. Instead, I asked, "Do you know a place called Briar Ridge?" His expression changed immediately. "Where'd you hear about that?" "I saw signs for it on Highway 20, but I couldn't find the actual town." He was quiet for a long moment. "Briar Ridge burned down in 1973. Terrible fire. Nothing left of it now but ruins and bad memories. But I saw signs." "Those old signs should have been taken down decades ago," he interrupted. "Highway Department keeps saying they'll do it, but—" He shrugged. "Anyway, you're the third person this year who's mentioned getting lost looking for it. That stretch of road can play tricks on your mind at night." I wanted to tell him about the woman, about the impossible loop, about my car mysteriously restarting, but the words wouldn't come. He already looked at me like I was half crazy. I filled my tank, bought some coffee, and got back on the road, taking the interstate the rest of the way to Bozeman. I've never driven that scenic route again. I stick to main highways now, with plenty of traffic and streetlights. I've researched Briar Ridge online and found newspaper articles about the fire. Apparently, it was so devastating that the town was never rebuilt. Some of the residents relocated to nearby communities, but most scattered across the country. I don't know who that woman was or what she wanted. I don't know how I drove in a loop on a straight highway or how my car started with an empty tank. All I know is that somewhere on Highway 20, there's a stretch of road that doesn't follow the normal rules of time and space, and the ghosts of Briar Ridge are still there, trapped in some kind of midnight purgatory. Sometimes I still wake up at exactly 12:06 a.m., my heart racing, certain that if I look out my window, I'll see her standing there, her palm pressed against the glass, her mouth forming words I'll never understand. Story 17. I never believed those stupid urban legends about people living in your walls or hiding in your house. I always thought they were just stories people made up to scare each other. I was wrong. So wrong. What happened to me last month has changed everything about how I feel in my own home, and I'm still struggling to sleep through the night. I'm 17, and my parents rarely leave me home alone overnight. They're pretty protective, especially my dad. but last month they got invited to this fancy dinner party downtown for my dad's work. It was on a Friday night, and they'd be staying at a hotel since the party would run late. I practically begged them to let me stay home alone. I had a huge biology test coming up Monday, and I swore I'd study all weekend. Truth is, I just wanted the house to myself for once. Our house in Westbrook Falls is pretty big. 3 bedrooms upstairs, a finished basement, and this really old attic space we mostly use for storage. It's one of those older houses with lots of weird noises that my parents always explain away as the house settling. My parents left around 5 in the afternoon. Mom called me like 4 times before they even reached downtown to remind me about locking all the doors and windows. I promised I would, and as soon as they were gone, I ordered a pizza and decided to take a break from studying. Big mistake. I was scrolling through Netflix looking for something to watch when I found this horror movie I'd been wanting to see. The description said something about threatening phone calls coming from inside the house. I know. Why would I watch a scary movie while home alone? I guess I thought it would be fun to freak myself out a little. The pizza arrived just as I was starting the movie, and I settled in for what I thought would be a chill night. The movie wasn't even that scary at first. I finished my pizza and decided to make some popcorn during a slow part. When I went to the kitchen, I noticed it was getting dark outside. I flipped on more lights around the house. Not because I was scared or anything, just because, well, okay, maybe I was a little jumpy. The microwave beeped and I poured the popcorn into a bowl. That's when I heard it, a creaking sound from upstairs, not like the normal house settling sounds I was used to. This was different, like weight shifting on the old wooden floors. I froze, the popcorn bowl clutched against my chest. "Hello?" I called out. Nothing. I told myself it was just the wind or something. Our windows upstairs were old and sometimes made noise when it was windy. But when I checked my phone, the weather app showed clear skies and barely any wind. I turned down the volume on the TV and listened. For about 2 minutes, there was nothing. I started to relax and was about to hit play again when I heard another creak, followed by what sounded like footsteps. My heart started racing. Someone was upstairs. I thought about calling my parents, but what if it was nothing? They'd rush home for no reason, and I'd never be allowed to stay home alone again. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen drawer and slowly made my way to the stairs. Looking back, I should have just called 911 right then, but I kept thinking there had to be a rational explanation. Maybe a window was open and something had blown in. Maybe our cat Oscar had somehow gotten back inside, even though he'd been staying at my aunt's while my parents were away. The upstairs hallway was dark except for a nightlight in the bathroom. I switched on the hallway light and held my breath, listening. Nothing. But then I noticed something weird. There was light coming from underneath my parents' bedroom door. A thin sliver of yellow light against the dark hardwood floor. I knew I'd turned off all the lights before they left. My mom is super strict about not wasting electricity, and I'd double-checked everything. "Oscar?" I called out, hoping our cat had somehow gotten home and knocked over a lamp or something. But deep down, I knew it wasn't the cat. I took a few steps toward my parents' room, and that's when I heard it, a raspy whisper coming from inside their bedroom. I couldn't make out what was being said, but it was definitely a voice. My whole body went cold. I stood there, frozen, unable to move toward the door or run back downstairs. That's when I glanced down the hallway and saw him, a tall figure standing at the far end near the attic door. He was just standing there, watching me. In the dim light, I could only make out his silhouette, but it was definitely a man, tall, thin, and completely still. I screamed and ran. I practically fell down the stairs in my panic, twisted my ankle, but the adrenaline was pumping so hard, I barely felt it. I grabbed my cell phone from the coffee table and ran to the front door, but my hands were shaking so badly I couldn't get the deadbolt unlocked. I could hear him coming down the stairs now, slow, deliberate footsteps, not rushing, like he knew he had all the time in the world. I gave up on the front door and ran to the kitchen, dialing 911 as I went. The dispatcher answered, and I was crying so hard she could barely understand me. "Someone's in my house," I managed to say between sobs. Please help me." She asked for my address, and I gave it to her, whispering now because I could hear him moving through the living room. "Stay on the line," she said. "Officers are on their way. Is there somewhere safe you can hide?" I looked around frantically and spotted our walk-in pantry. I slipped inside and closed the door as quietly as I could, wedging myself behind some shelves in the back corner. It was dark and cramped, but I felt slightly safer hidden away. "I'm hiding in the pantry," I whispered to the dispatcher. "Please hurry." "They'll be there in about 7 minutes," she assured me. "Stay quiet and stay hidden." Those 7 minutes were the longest of my life. I could hear him moving around the kitchen now, opening drawers, his footsteps circling closer to the pantry. I covered my mouth to keep from making any noise, but tears were streaming down my face. Then he spoke, and my blood turned to ice. "Lily," he called, his voice low and rough. "Lily, I know you're in here somewhere." He knew my name. This wasn't some random break-in. He'd been watching me. How long had he been watching me? "I've been watching you study for that biology test," he continued, his voice getting closer to the pantry door. "You're going to ace it. You're so smart, Lily, so much smarter than your parents think." I was shaking uncontrollably now. The dispatcher was asking me something, but I couldn't focus on her words. All I could think was that this man knew my routines, knew what I was studying, knew things only someone who had been watching me closely would know. His footsteps stopped right outside the pantry door. I held my breath, pressing myself harder against the wall behind the shelves. "The police are almost there, Lily," the dispatcher said, loud enough that I worried he might hear. I lowered the volume and put the phone against my chest. I could see the shadow of his feet under the door. Then, suddenly, there was a crash from the living room. The pantry door never opened. Instead, his footsteps moved quickly away. I heard my dad's voice shouting, "Who the hell are you? Get out of my house!" My dad was home. Why was my dad home? Later, I found out he'd forgotten some important documents for the dinner party and had come back to get them while my mom went ahead to the event. I heard sounds of a struggle, things breaking, and my dad yelling. I burst out of the pantry, still clutching my phone. "Officers are pulling up now," the dispatcher said, but I was already running toward the living room. What I saw there will haunt me forever. My dad was on the floor, wrestling with the intruder who had a knife. The man was gaunt, with greasy hair and wild eyes. His clothes were filthy and he smelled awful, like he hadn't showered in weeks. My dad saw me and yelled, "Lily, run!" But instead, I grabbed the cast iron frying pan from the stove and swung it as hard as I could at the back of the intruder's head. It connected with a sickening thud, and he collapsed on top of my dad. Blue lights flashed through the windows as police cars pulled up outside. Within seconds, officers were rushing through the door, guns drawn. They pulled the unconscious man off my dad and handcuffed him. My dad hugged me so tight I could barely breathe, both of us shaking and crying. He had a cut on his arm where the man had slashed him with the knife, but otherwise he was okay. The police searched our house and made a horrifying discovery. The man had been living in our attic. He'd made a little nest up there with a sleeping bag and some of our food. There were empty water bottles, granola bar wrappers, and, this still makes me sick to think about, a notebook filled with details about our daily routines. When we went to bed, when we left for school or work, what we ate, what shows we watched. There were pages dedicated just to me. What clothes I wore, who I talked to on the phone, what music I listened to. He'd been watching me through the attic vent that opened into my closet. He'd been there for days, maybe even weeks. As they took him away, he looked at me with those wild eyes and said, "I'll come back for you, Lily. This isn't over." The police assured us he would be locked up for a long time. Breaking and entering, assault with a deadly weapon, stalking. The charges were serious. But his words stuck with me. That night, even with my parents home and police officers still at our house taking statements, I couldn't shake the feeling that this nightmare wasn't really over. I kept thinking about how he'd been living right above my room, watching me sleep, listening to my conversations. How many nights had I lain in bed thinking I was alone when he was right there? We're selling the house now. Dad says we need a fresh start somewhere else, and I couldn't agree more. I sleep in my parents' room every night, too terrified to be alone. I know he's in custody. I know he can't get to me. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear creaking in the attic. And I still can't shake the feeling that somehow, someday, he's going to make good on his promise. Story 18. I still can't sleep with mirrors in my room. It's been 5 years since we moved out of that farmhouse, and I still cover any reflective surface before I go to bed. My parents think I'm being ridiculous, but they didn't see what Tommy and I saw. They didn't feel what we felt. We moved to that old farmhouse when I was 16. It was this beautiful 2-story building from the 1920s with weathered white paint and a big wraparound porch. It sat right at the edge of Blackwood Forest, about 20 minutes outside of town. Dad got a job transfer and Mom fell in love with the rustic charm and the fact that it was way cheaper than anything in the city. Tommy was only 8 at the time and was excited about having a huge yard to play in. The previous owners had left the place in pretty good condition, but it needed some updates. The carpets were old, the wallpaper was peeling in places, and there was this musty smell that seemed to linger, no matter how many windows we opened. But it had character, as Mom kept saying. That first day, we spent hours just exploring all the rooms and deciding who would get which bedroom. I remember spotting the narrow staircase leading up to the attic and immediately claiming it as my space. Mom was hesitant at first. She worried about me being too isolated from the rest of the family, but Dad thought it would be good for me to have my own area. "She's a teenager," he said. "Let her have some privacy." The attic was surprisingly big, with sloped ceilings and 2 dormer windows that let in plenty of light. It had been partially finished by the previous owners, with wooden floorboards and white painted walls. There was a small bathroom attached, which sealed the deal for me. I could have my own little apartment away from Tommy's constant noise and my parents hovering. It took about a week to clean it up properly. I found old boxes of Christmas decorations, some vintage clothes, and various household items the previous family had forgotten. In the far corner, covered with an old sheet and leaning against the wall, was this massive mirror. When I pulled the sheet off, I was instantly drawn to it. It was about 6 feet tall, with an ornate wooden frame carved with intricate designs. The glass was filthy, covered in years of dust and grime, but I could tell it was beautiful underneath. The frame was this dark, rich wood with all these strange symbols carved into it. They looked almost like letters from some alphabet I'd never seen before, mixed with what seemed like tiny faces or creatures woven into the design. I spent an entire Saturday afternoon cleaning it. The more dust I wiped away, the more detailed the carvings became. There were spirals and curves that seemed to flow into each other, and what looked like tiny eyes embedded in the patterns. It was creepy but fascinating at the same time. When I finally finished cleaning the glass, I propped it up against the wall opposite my bed and stood back to admire it. That's when I felt it for the first time, this weird sensation like the mirror wasn't just reflecting me, but somehow looking at me. I know how that sounds, but it wasn't just my imagination. The feeling was so strong that I actually turned around to see if someone was standing behind me. Of course, no one was there. I didn't think much of it at first. The house was old, and old houses always feel a bit strange when you first move in. For the next couple of weeks, I settled into my attic room, arranging my furniture and decorating the walls with posters. I put my desk near one of the windows and my bed along the wall opposite the mirror. I found myself spending more and more time in my room, sitting in front of that mirror. Sometimes I'd just stare at my reflection for what felt like minutes, but turned out to be hours. I told myself I was just admiring how the mirror made the room look bigger, how it reflected the light from the windows in interesting ways. But looking back now, I think it was already affecting me. About 3 weeks after we moved in, I started noticing changes. Small things at first. I'd come back to my room and swear that some of my things had been moved slightly. The book I'd left on my nightstand would be on my desk instead. The sweater I'd draped over my chair would be folded neatly on my bed. When I mentioned it to my mom, she said she hadn't been in my room. Then the dreams started. I'd wake up in the middle of the night feeling like someone was watching me. In the darkness, I could see the mirror's outline, and I swear I could see movement in it, even though the room was too dark to make out any reflections. I started covering it with a sheet before going to bed, but every morning the sheet would be on the floor. One night, about a month after we moved in, I woke up at exactly 3 in the morning. I know because I checked my phone, the bright screen momentarily blinding me in the darkness. When my eyes adjusted, I looked toward the mirror and froze. Even in the dim light from my phone, I could see my reflection sitting up in bed, just like I was. But its eyes looked hollow, like empty sockets, and it was smiling at me in a way that made my blood run cold. I blinked, and the image was gone. Just my normal reflection staring back, terrified. I convinced myself it was just my imagination, that I was still half asleep and seeing things. I pulled the covers over my head and somehow managed to fall back asleep. The next morning, I told my parents about the mirror. I tried to explain how it made me feel, how I thought I'd seen something strange in it. Dad laughed and said I was watching too many horror movies. Mom was a little more sympathetic, but still dismissed it as just my imagination working overtime in a new house. "If it bothers you that much, why don't we move it to the basement?" she suggested. But I couldn't bear the thought of it being moved. Even as I was telling them how much it scared me, part of me was already thinking about getting back to my room, back to the mirror. It was like it had some kind of hold on me that I couldn't explain. That night, I had the worst dream yet. I saw my reflection step out of the mirror, moving toward my bed with these jerky, unnatural movements. Its face looked like mine, but different somehow, paler, with dark circles around its eyes. It reached for me with cold, pale hands, and I could feel its icy fingers brush against my cheek before I woke up gasping for air. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. The room was dark, except for the faint moonlight coming through the windows. I reached for my phone to check the time, 3 in the morning again, and used the screen's light to look at the mirror. What I saw made me drop my phone onto the floor. My reflection was standing still, even though I was sitting up in bed. It was just standing there, staring at me with those hollow eyes, pointing one finger directly at me. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. I just sat there frozen as my reflection slowly lowered its arm and pressed one finger to its lips in a shh gesture. I must have passed out from fear because the next thing I remember is waking up to sunlight streaming through my windows. The mirror looked normal again, just showing my terrified face as I stared at it from my bed. I was determined to tell my parents again, to make them believe me this time. But when I went downstairs for breakfast, the words wouldn't come. Every time I tried to bring up the mirror, it was like something was physically stopping me from speaking about it. I'd open my mouth and nothing would come out, or I'd suddenly start talking about something completely different. By the end of breakfast, I'd given up trying. Over the next few days, things got worse. I started hearing whispers in my room when I was alone, too quiet to make out words, but definitely voices. Objects would move when I wasn't looking. I'd place my hairbrush on my dresser, turn around, and find it on the floor. My closet door would be closed when I left for school and open when I came back. I started avoiding my room as much as possible, spending time downstairs with my family or outside in the yard. But every night I had to go back up there to sleep. I tried covering the mirror again, securing the sheet with push pins this time. But by morning the sheet would be torn down, the pins scattered across the floor. One Saturday afternoon, about 6 weeks after we moved in, I was helping Mom with laundry when I realized I hadn't seen Tommy for a while. He'd been playing video games in the living room earlier, but now the console was off and the room was empty. "Tommy," I called out. No answer. A cold feeling of dread washed over me. I knew exactly where he was. I took the stairs two at a time, racing up to the attic. The door was open just a crack, and I could hear Tommy's voice inside talking to someone. When I pushed the door open, I saw him standing in front of the mirror. The sheet I'd put up the night before was on the floor beside him. He was just staring at his reflection, his head tilted to one side like he was listening to something. "Tommy," I said quietly, trying not to startle him, "what are you doing up here?" He didn't turn around. "Looking at the funny mirror," he said, his voice oddly flat. "The people in it are different." I moved closer, trying to keep my eyes away from the glass. "What people, Tommy?" "The ones that look like us but aren't us. They want to play." My heart was pounding as I forced myself to look at the mirror. At first I just saw Tommy and me, standing side by side in the reflection. But then our reflections smiled. These horrible, wide smiles that stretched too far across our faces, even though neither Tommy nor I was smiling. Tommy's reflection raised its hand and pressed it against the glass from the other side. To my horror, Tommy did the same, placing his small palm against the mirror's surface. I saw the glass begin to ripple around his hand, like water. "Tommy, no!" I screamed, lunging forward to grab him. His reflection's smile grew wider, its eyes turning black as it reached out. Not just pressing against the glass anymore, but pushing through it, its hand emerging into our world like it was coming through a thin membrane. I grabbed Tommy around the waist and yanked him backward just as the thing on the other side grasped for him. We fell to the floor, and I heard a sharp crack. The mirror's glass had split from top to bottom, a jagged line running right through the middle. Tommy was crying now, confused and scared. I held him tightly, both of us staring at the broken mirror. Through the cracked glass, I could see our reflections, or what should have been our reflections, glaring at us with such hatred that I felt physically ill. I dragged Tommy out of the room and downstairs, where I finally managed to tell my parents everything. This time the words came easily, tumbling out between sobs. Maybe the mirror's hold on me had been broken along with the glass. Dad went up to look. When he came back down, his face was pale. He didn't say what he'd seen, just that we were staying in a hotel that night and he'd be calling a realtor in the morning. We moved out within a week, leaving most of our furniture behind, including the mirror. Mom wanted to break it completely and throw it away, but Dad wouldn't let anyone touch it. He just locked the attic door and left it there. I later found out that the house had a history. 3 families before us had moved out suddenly, all within months of moving in. One family had lost a child, a 13-year-old girl who disappeared from her bedroom one night and was never found. Sometimes I wonder if she's still there, trapped behind the glass with those things that weren't really reflections. Sometimes, in my darkest moments, I wonder if part of me is trapped there too. We don't talk about the farmhouse anymore. My parents act like those 7 weeks never happened. Tommy says he doesn't remember any of it, which is probably for the best. But I remember, and I keep every mirror in my new room covered just in case. Something followed us here, just in case it's still watching, waiting for me to look back.